Residents tragically lost their lives in the fire at Grenfell Tower. I ask every member of the Council to pay our deepest and continuing respects in the conventional manner by marking the moment with 72 seconds of silence now. Would everyone please remain standing? Thank you. Please sit down. The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Are these now agreed as a correct record?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councillor Lowry.
one very slight amendment to my response to the Fox Primary School public speaking. It does record my response relatively accurately, but it omits the part where I spoke about the removal of the cycle lanes from Kensington High Street. Everything else is included, but if that part could be reinstated to the minutes, for accuracy, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Noted, thank you. Other than that point from Councillor Lowry, are all the minutes agreed as a correct record? Thank you. I will now sign them. Item 2, special announcements by the Mayor. I report with sadness the death of former Councillor Anne, better known as Pat White, née Kelly, who served on the Council from 1978 to 1982. She was a councillor in Redcliffe Ward. Item 3, Chief Executive's communications. I shall now ask the Chief Executive to report apologies for absence or lateness from this meeting.
Mr. Mayor and councillors, I have received apologies from councillors Rendell, Idris, Hammond, Will, Siren, Bennett, Muir, Marshall, Verboven and El Nagi.
Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any matter before the Council this evening? Item 5, appointment of Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service. Item 5, appointment of Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service. I now call upon Councillor Campbell to move the reception of the report and Councillor Taylor-Smith to second.
I'd like to move the report, Mr. Mayor.
And I beg to second, Mr. Mayor.
I now call upon Councillor Campbell to speak for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, I wasn't going to. I was going to keep all the nice things I'm going to say about Maxime to my words at the beginning of my speech a bit later. But I would like to just reassure everyone that this has been a hugely long and involved process where we've interviewed really high caliber candidates from all across the country, and we've been lucky to attract such good candidates, and we've been especially lucky to have Maxine Holsworth, who is prepared to become our new chief exec in the future, because as you all know, she was with us for 20 months after Grenfell, and so we know her well, and we really look forward to her, if should be appointed this evening, to becoming our new chief exec and stepping into the footsteps of Barry Quirk. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Do any other members wish to speak for up to 5 minutes? Councillor Campbell, would you like to add anything and sum up or not?
No, I'd just like to say we're absolutely delighted that Maxine Holdsworth is going to be our chief exec starting in the autumn.
In which case, I now put the recommendation that Maxine Holdsworth be appointed to the role of Chief Executive for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to the vote. Would those for the recommendation as set out in the report please show? And would those against please show? Are there any abstentions? On the basis that the majority have voted in favour, I declare the recommendation as set out in the report agreed. I now invite Maxine Holdsworth to address the meeting.
Thank you very much for having me along tonight and for the vote that you have just taken. And I intend to fulfil the trust that you put into me by taking the decision to appoint me as the Chief Executive of the Council. It does feel like an enormous privilege. Obviously, I know the borough well and feel really an enormous kind of commitment and loyalty to this borough. The Council is now rightly focused on being the best council. There are other contenders, I know, but it has taken the challenge put to it by the bereaved and the survivors of Grenfell Tower, and that is a challenge that I readily accept as the incoming Chief Executive, and it means an enormous amount to me, both personally and professionally. You will hear a lot more from me in the future about what that means and how we will do it, but for now, my job as the Chief Exec will be to make sure that we've got the best possible community relationships, the best possible partnerships, the best possible workforce and skills to deliver that excellence that the Council rightly seeks. In so doing, I will be carrying on the work of Barry Quirk and the experience and wisdom with which he has steered the Council over recent years. And we are both very committed between us to making sure that that is a smooth transition. I look forward to working with you all.
Agenda item 6, public speaking. The public speaking session of this meeting has been set aside for young people who live, work or study in the borough to address the council. Could I please ask that each speaker would introduce themselves before they question, because it's my understanding that the order that was planned is now been slightly changed. So who's going to ask the first question?
Hello, my name is Eleonora. I go to Chelsea Academy. I'm 15 years old and I'm from Russia. My question, it concerns the cost of living, which is rising, and what support is available for members of my community, such as parents and neighbours, because of the effect it may have on the less affluent people.
I now call upon the relevant lead member to respond, followed
Thanks.
by a councillor from the Labour group.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just over-enthusiastic there to answer your question, and thank you, first of all, for coming. It's nice not to be the youngest speaker of the night for once at this council meeting, which is a treat. The cost of living is an enormous issue, I know, for many thousands of our residents, and it's certainly one of my priorities in my role as lead member for finance. Recently, we have launched our cost of living support hub, where we're putting together all of the help and guidance that's available to residents in one place. But that's just the start of the support we'll be offering to people. Over the coming months, we're going to be looking very closely at other targeted interventions that we can make, so that everybody who is finding the cost of living particularly hard has access to support, and that the council's focus is squarely on the people that need help the most and our most vulnerable communities.
Would a Labour councillor like to respond?
Thanks so much for your question. My name is Mona Ahmed. I'm one of the councillors with the Labour group in Nottingdale. Thanks a lot for your question. I just want to start by saying that this council has a really well-documented, long-standing history of excluding those affluent areas that you talk about, and excluding them from anything but the bare minimum. And it appears that dealing with the cost of living crisis is actually no different. They've said that they're going to put aside 1.5 million that's available to the most at-risk households, which is completely inadequate. And I say that after comparing it to what other London boroughs, similar to ours, are going to be delivering. We've got 1.15 million, Lambeth has 4.3 million, Suffolk 5 million, Tower Hamlets 3 million. Haringey, 2.3 million. Wandsworth, again, almost double what we have at 2 million. Another basic comparison is the replacement for free school meals over the summer holidays. You know, how much is being provided by this council? It's £3 per child per week. Compare that to councils in Essex who are paying 5 times that much, £15 a week per child. So actually we should be doing we should be doing a lot more than what we're doing. We should be, to begin with, we should be putting together a full action plan, which this council doesn't have yet. It has a hub, which has sort of a list of resources and charities that your families can turn to, but no actual full comprehensive strategy plan. There are so many other things that we could be doing. We should be improving access to the government's energy bill rebate scheme, by extending it to support residents who aren't liable for council tax, who are going to be missing out. We could be declaring a cost of living emergency, which would make this a real priority for the council, but we haven't done that, because this is going to be an emergency. The triple whammy of inflation, increased tax, fuel costs, and the cuts to the universal credit altogether means that this is going to be an emergency for a lot of people. We should be committing to creating more jobs in the borough that pay a London living wage, creating apprenticeships for young people. Suffolk Council created 4,000 apprenticeships for young people in the last 4 years.
Councillor Ahmed,
way, these
can
are
I
all
just
things...
ask how
Sure.
much longer you're going to be?
I've got 2 minutes, haven't I?
You've-
Yeah?
I think you've had
I've got
rather
2
longer
minutes.
than that.
Yeah, I'll use my 2 minutes if that's all right.
You've had your 2 minutes, I
yeah,
think is
we should also-
Councillor Ahmed, if you've had 2 minutes, you've had 2 minutes.
Have I had 2 minutes?
I
Right,
think
okay.
you've had a very generous
Yeah,
2 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I think I've laid out
Councillor
what other
Ahmed, can you
councillors
be
doing that we
quiet,
could be doing.
please?
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, we've allowed some liberty to the majority party councillors in these answers at the last meeting. I think we could be a bit courteous to our speakers as well.
I think, Councillor Lari, that was uncalled for. Councillor Lari, please don't. Could we have the second questioner, please?
Hello, my name is Tafe. I'm the steering group member for London as part of the UK Youth Parliament, and I was the former youth MP for RBKC, and I've lived there my whole life. Being able to represent the borough has allowed me to identify different issues that young people value important. We have heard from our peers that there is a great divide between young people in the south and the north of the borough. Post-COVID, we have seen that to help with socialising and get back to normal, youth services have been at the core of this by providing young people many opportunities. While the borough provides many youth services for young people in the north and the south of the borough, often the south of the borough feel as if there are less youth facilities. In contrast, the north of the borough feel as if they are at a financial disadvantage in comparison to the south. The north feeling as if their financial status can often be a barrier to their educational progression at the levels of which a barrier to the levels at which their education is being taught at. And finally, the consensus between the two is that they both feel like they have a lack of career opportunities and work experience, especially post-COVID. How can the council help bridge the divide between the opportunities supporting young people to reach their full potential?
Thank you for that question, Tafe. I now call upon the Conservative lead member to respond, followed by a councillor from the Labour group.
Thank you. Thank you, Tafe, for that very well thought out question, and great to see you again. And I look forward to seeing you in Parliament at some time in the future. I'm sure you'll add a lot. And we really are one borough, and so I'm sorry that there is this discrepancy that you're talking about. And we really are committed to ensuring equal opportunities for all young people right across our borough. Last week I was in Chelsea at the World's End Venture Centre, seeing some of the youth provision there. And like you say, in the north there is a lot of youth provision, and I've had kind of dancing lessons when I went to visit Athena at the Lancaster Club when I was deputy mayor. And so I know there's a lot up there. But your point about employment and opportunities for young people in the north, we are launching a scheme called Quick Start, which will provide up to 60 young people with subsidised employment placements, up to 6 months. So similar to the kind of the government Kickstart scheme. And I know in the council we have quite a few Kickstart employees, quite, obviously young ones, which is great. And then also in the north, there's a Building Lives Academy run by Wilmot & Dixon, which is actually on a council property. So we do a social investment lease for that. And they offer 11-week courses for young people, aged 16 to 24 in construction, which I thought was quite interesting. I get lots of practical experience. And then this morning I had a meeting with Angela Spence from Kensington Chelsea Social Council, and she really coordinates a lot of the voluntary services in the sector. And we as a council really work with them. And we have a £2 million grant that we give to the voluntary sector, and they do amazing things. A lot of that is in the youth provision. So that's just a little taster of some of the things we do, but really would love to hear more about those differences you talked about as well. Thank you. Is that 2 minutes?
Thank you, Councillor McVeigh. I now call upon a Labour councillor to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for your question. Sorry, we're a bit confused because the numbers have got juggled and we're just trying to work out who's saying it. We're all right, are we? Yeah, okay. You are absolutely right that there's more provision in the north than the south, but despite what I hear from my colleague here, there's very little. There's certainly not enough. And in the years that I've been on the council, which is 16 years, I've seen the youth services in the north being eroded and eroded, then privatised, then unprivatised, or whatever you want to call it. And I certainly know that they are struggling for funding. Our youth services are struggling in the north. And I really fear for what is going to happen for our young people with fewer and fewer places to go. They shouldn't be run by charities. They should be run by the council. It should be a statutory duty of this council to provide the youth services that our young people need. A lot of people, as we know, have gone through an awful lot over the last few years, not only Grenfell, but COVID and being stuck at home and missing out with their friends and so on. And obviously, young people from Holland Park School have been through an awful lot as well. A lot of them have been in contact with us. There needs to be far more support, and it should be a statutory duty. It shouldn't be run by charities, and it should be there for everybody, properly funded, wherever it's needed, north and south. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Denkode. Could we now have the third question? if you can introduce yourself and then read out your question, that would be... That's fine. In that case, I will read out the question that Richard was to have asked, but he's not here. What has the council done to support the traveller community, and what plans do you have to improve support in the coming years? So I now call upon the relevant lead member to respond, again followed by a councillor from the Labour group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm very sorry that Richard's not here in person, and it's brilliant to have young people coming and telling us and giving their views. So the traveller community within North Kensington, there's a lot of history to it. It's been here since the 19th century, and it's very important for us, and we're very proud to have them on Stable Way. And I would very much welcome the opportunity of meeting with Richard and the other travellers on the travel site and hearing directly in terms of the issues and things that they wish to raise as far as the council is concerned. Yeah, because I think it's very important to develop a strong relationship between us and the travellers. We already have a site manager on the site dedicated to it. We already fund the Westway Health and Welfare Officer and the mini club that goes on there. And it's sad to see that they no longer have a representative residents association, and that's something which I think we would very much encourage and support them to do, so we can hear in terms of what their views are. I think so. That's sort of where we have been. I think I went and visited Stable Way earlier on in the year, and I think it's fair to say it is looking a bit tired. But it's important to stress that Stable Way is in our capital improvement programme. Funds have been set aside in order to do works for the 19 static sites that you actually have there. So there is an opportunity, I think, to do improvement on that. Equally, we are working on a grant scheme to provide environmental improvements, and what has been identified is the road. The road is in appalling state, and also the opportunity to do some fencing, and that's something we'll do. The road is actually owned by the Westway Trust. It's something which I think we can improve, and we can also look at the potential of adopting it. And then finally, there is an extra pitch that's been identified. We had preliminary discussions on that last year, and again, I think it's important very much to meet with the community, find out what their ideas are. There's a suggestion that we might put another site on there, suggesting it could be used for livestock, etc. But
thank you.
So thank you for the question.
Could we have a response from the Labour group? Councillor Simmons.
Hello again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Richard for sending his question. I just want to mention that policy H08 in the Council's new local plan review refers to traveller accommodation and commits the Council to working closely with London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, TfL and the Mayor of London to protect, improve and, if possible, increase the capacity of the existing traveller site at Stable Way. The Council has a duty under the National Planning Policy for traveller sites to assess the accommodation needs of travellers. The London Plan requires London boroughs to update their needs and their needs assessments as part of the development plan process. Now, the last needs assessment carried out by the Council was in 2016, as I understand it, and according to the new local plan review, it's currently being updated. RBKC is committing to working together with Hammersmith and Fulham to actively explore options on how provision can be made in accordance with policy H08. Now, the last needs assessment concluded that there was a need for 3 additional pitches between 2015 and 2020, and 9 in total across RBKC and Hammersmith and Fulham between 2015 and 2030. I wasn't aware of how many of these have so far been provided, but I understand from the Deputy Leader it's 1 extra pitch so far. As one of the ward councillors for Notting Dale, which includes the only traveller site in the borough at Stable Way, it strikes me that what is missing from this approach is any explicit consideration of needs other than the statutory minimum concerning accommodation. I look forward to seeing the updated joint needs assessment, but I also look forward to hearing how well and how fully the traveller community themselves feel that it represents their needs. And I look forward to hearing from them how best these needs can be met, including access to education, health, welfare, employment, and other forms of support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Could we now have the next question, please?
My name is Aya. I'm a member of Youth Parliament. My colleague and I recently attended a stop and search workshop with the Metropolitan Police in preparation for Carnival, and we felt this information was very informative and other young people could benefit from similar workshops, possibly reducing the tension between groups. So how can leaders work with the Youth Council to deliver these workshops to young people across the borough, supporting and promoting the work Carlos and his team are doing?
Thank you. I now call upon the lead member to respond, followed by a councillor from the Labour Group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Aya, for coming along tonight. Unfortunately, the lead member for community safety isn't here this evening, but she's left me some notes as to how best to answer your question. It's a really, really important issue, and it sounds as though it was a really worthwhile experience attending this. I mean, I'm really glad to hear that the Met Police are putting on such workshops, and I know from a note from Emma that what she suggests is perhaps we have a meeting with herself and the youth teams to make sure we can roll these out even wider and make sure as many kids and children as possible can attend. Sounds great. Thank you.
And a member from the Labour Group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Aya. It sounds like you had a very good experience, and thank heavens for that. I have to say there used to be a lot more of this going on in days gone by, and I'm absolutely delighted that Carlos, who's absolutely ace, is doing this. I have to be quite honest, I didn't know that the Youth Council was still in existence. I didn't know that there were lots of exciting, keen young people willing to come forward and serve on it. I don't know why we've been kept out of this, but I want to invite you to our Labour group and tell us exactly where you stand and what your needs are. We've been in contact with an awful lot of people from Holland Park School over the past year, and we know what their concerns are, Holland Park related. But it's fantastic that you're doing this work, and clearly there needs to be more of this, especially with people who won't come to council and voice their needs. So thank you.
Can we have the next question, please?
Hello, I'm Mohammed. I currently attend Holland Park School. I'm in year 10. And I'll be asking a question of what the council...
Do you think you could speak up a little bit, Mohammed? Because some people at the back may struggle to hear you. Can you introduce yourself again and your question in full, please?
Hello, I'm Mohammed. I currently attend Holland Park School. I'm in year 10. I'll be asking the question, what actions will the council be willing to take in regards to supporting students of Holland Park School?
I call upon the relevant Conservative lead member to respond, followed by a councillor from the Labour Group.
Thank you. Mohammed, thank you so much for coming to speak to us, and thank you to the whole Youth Council for coming again to the Chamber to speak to us. It's so important that we listen to your voices. Mohammed, this is such an important issue, and it's something that I, on a day-to-day basis, am trying to help support the students, the parents, the teachers, and everybody with Holland Park, because we know it's a really, really unsettling and difficult time for everyone with what you've been going through, feeling like you haven't been listened to, you haven't been consulted with. And we're absolutely doing everything we can to support you. But I think the thing that's really difficult to acknowledge is that it is an academy. So as a council, we can sort of emotionally support you. We can do things like we already have, which is send our safeguarding teams in to support the safeguarding teams in the school, to provide some space for people to take exams, to be working, as we have been, really hard to talk to the Regional Schools Commission, to talk to the DFE, to get our MP involved, to be writing letters, to campaigning, to say that we really think it's so important that the young people and the parents are listened to. We do have to acknowledge and accept that the council, we don't, it's not our decision in the end. But we, cross-party in this council, are all here, and we think you have done an amazing job, all of you young people, to make your concerns and voice your concerns, and we've really heard them. And whatever happens in the future, obviously we want the school to be the best school it can be for you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Could I now call upon a member of the Labour Group to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mohammed, Year 10 from Holland Park. As you may well aware of, my son is year 9, hopefully catching up with you, but he's still a year ahead. And I'm sure what's been happening at Holland Park is not acceptable. And it's not acceptable for many reasons. It's not acceptable for the local government, as local authority, as us, can come out and say we're not in a position to do something about it. Yes, we are, and we will have to do something about it. For example, yesterday, you've seen the weather was very, very bad. There was a fire at some of the motorways, some private lands. The police and the firefighters did not say this is a private land, we're not attending. They had to do their duty. And in that similar case, we have to do our duty and make sure that we respond to the local academies in Kensington or Chelsea. If they're failing as what they have done or hostile takeover, we will have to support. And you may as well just stay a bit longer later on. I will be asking a relevant question about Holland Park to the lead members, and we'll talk about it a bit further. But what we can do, hopefully, is to unite, as we did before, to make sure that we will stop the hostile takeover. I understand, I have even received, as a parent, I've received a letter from United Learning telling me what they're doing, and the decision is still yet to be made. So how come a United Learning can write to the parents, of course, in agreement with governors who already have given the decision to United Learning without proper scrutiny, and now write to us and say the school has been handed over to us and we are taking over. This is absolutely wrong, and we will not allow, and we will continue as a council to work together. But ultimately, we will win, and hopefully Holland Park will have a legacy for you, your generation, and the future generations. So stay a bit later on. Hopefully you will find out whether we will sign a lease with them or not. Thank you.
Thank you. And could we have the next question?
Hello, my name is Jake. I'm the interim deputy youth mayor, and I currently attend Kensington Aldridge Academy. I'm 17. My question is regarding mental health, because I feel like it's important to acknowledge, especially coming out of a pandemic, these issues won't disappear with it. So my question is, how do you plan to utilise the Youth Council as a voice platform for young people struggling with their mental health issues after the pandemic?
I now call upon the lead member to respond, followed by a councillor from the Labour group.
Hello, Jake, and thank you very much for coming. I'm actually replying on behalf of one of my colleagues who isn't here today. But you're absolutely right. I mean, mental health and well-being is such an important issue. And we recognise there was a consultation done in 2019 where 1,000 young people were spoken to, and that was identified as absolutely the priority then. And since then, of course, we've had the pandemic, and we're all really aware at how that has increased issues with mental health problems through isolation and not being able to attend schools and colleges, and just sort of not being with your peers and friends. So we're putting several things in place. We're actually recruiting at the council a mental health worker, and their job will actually be to coordinate the work across all the youth hubs and clubs that we've got. So that's one positive thing. Also, I hope you know that the Youth Council is about to launch a budget of £40,000 for youth participation grants, so that young people across the borough can apply for these grants, and you can actually come up with your own ideas as to what you think the service is, or if you want to work with a particular youth club, what the best way you want to use that funding. So I think that's a really interesting way of collaboratively working with you, for you to help design what would be a strong thing to do. They, as well as this new member officer that we're going to have here, there's going to be extra support for teachers and a new model for young people with moderate learning difficulties, autism, and mental health needs. And importantly, and I think this is really important, there will be an urgent advice phone line that will be staffed by health workers. So we're really happy to listen to your feedback. It's such an important issue,
folks,
and I'm just beginning
folks,
to skid across the surface of all that we want to
do. Could a member of the Labour group please respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much, Jake, for bringing this very important question to us today. I mean, you're very important to us and your group, and we would like to utilize your services. And we can be a central hub for local information and services. We can also liaise with lead organizations to keep the youths informed. We can also make ourselves visible. We can also create activity-based initiatives. And we can also have regular meetings and liaising with our local residents and the youths in order to hear their voices and to act accordingly based on your decisions and your findings. So you're very important, as I said before, so please do let us know and we'll work with you hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thaxter. Could we now have the 7th question?
Hi, my name is Lina. I'm 17. I'm a year 12 student. I don't go to school in the borough, but I live here and I attend Exclusions Youth Club. I am, and many of the young people at the age to build a CV so we can do well in life and learn more skills. However, it is really hard for us young people to find work due to our lack of experience. We don't get opportunities to get work experience, and when you want to apply for a job, employers ask for what experience you have, but you don't have any. Adding on to this, as we know, there's a lot of crimes, and I believe in order to reduce crimes within young people is by keeping them busy. Therefore, job opportunities will be very beneficial for many young offenders. This means that the more young people on employment means less crimes. Does the Council have any initiative to support young people finding high-quality work experience to boost employment? And are there any opportunities in place to support them with the steps regarding young offenders?
Thank you for that question. I now call upon the relevant lead member to respond, followed by a councillor from the Labour group.
Sorry, you've got me again. And again, I'm speaking on behalf of the lead member who isn't here today. But actually, it was a portfolio that I've just been running for the last 4 years. And so it's something that's so close to my heart, is employment and work experience and opportunities for young people. And it's something that all sorts of new initiatives have been put in place in the council that I'm sure my colleague will be following up. But just to highlight a few key things, because I haven't got time to go through all of them, we've employed a business relationship manager who is working with all our businesses to get work experience opportunities. We have an apprenticeship coordinator who is gathering apprenticeships from all our businesses in the borough. We are building a portal, an online portal, of which all sorts of opportunities will be on, which will be able to be disseminated through our trusted partners to young people. We have, as Sof McVeigh's already mentioned, developed our own council Quick Start scheme, which was on the back of the Kickstart scheme, but we increased the age to 30 because we thought it was too, stopping at 24 was too young, which is a great opportunity. But we have actually already helped some of our young people get into amazing work experience opportunities. We have got people working at Warner Studios at the moment, which is really exciting. And as well, the Construction Trust, we've got retail opportunities. So there are a lot of opportunities here, and obviously we need to work harder to disseminate them to you. But it is an important thing to do, and it is something that we're working on very, very hard. But actually, as your question was actually 2 questions that have been put into one. So if I could ask Mr. Mayor if I might have slightly more than 2 minutes, because I've got 2 questions that were put into one question from Lena. Because the second question is a really, really important one.
Can I just say, Councillor Folks, the answer is yes, but that means the Labour group gets correspondingly longer as well.
Of course, because that's the same for them. They've got 2 questions. So this was about what we're doing for young offenders, that question. And that's an equally important thing, because, as I said with the last one, you're quite right. If you have meaningful employment and a purpose, that does help prevent you getting into trouble, and it also is very beneficial for people's mental health. So it also applies to the question I was answering before. So we are very, very aware of how important it is to support young people into work. So again, I'm answering for one of my colleagues who's given me some notes here. So our youth offending team have got dedicated staff working to reduce employment difficulties and barriers to entering training and employment for young offenders. And these include roles such as an education, training and employment advisor, a speech and language therapist, an educational psychologist, and importantly, a targeted prevention team who provide personalised and one-to-one service and ongoing support for young people not in education, employment or training. So the staff in our youth offending team work with young people on an individual basis, and I think that's really important, the one-to-one support. And actually part of our Grenfell recovery support for getting into employment was funding a piece of work for Grenfell bereaved and survived for one-to-one support for young people to find work experience and job opportunities to get into. And also just to mention that we work closely, in fact we commission the St Giles Trust, who run job clubs for the local community, which focuses on supporting young people who have criminal convictions get into work. So sorry I've had to answer both those so quickly, but we'd love to come back and talk to all of you, or actually do an event in which we can specifically address
Councillor
how we can help you get into employment.
Thank you. Councillor Dentcoe, you have up to 4 minutes to answer both of those.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will answer the first part of the question in 2 minutes, and Councillor Ahmed will take 2 minutes to respond to the second question, which was part of what you wanted to say earlier on. So thank you. And if it sounds as if we're in a bit of a vacuum here, our former spokesperson for Family and Children's Services has now left the council and didn't actually hand over or keep us up to date, I'm sorry to say. So, but we have a new spokesperson now who is will be getting up to speed very quickly. As for high quality work experience, they used to offer it at Holland Park School. I know young people who had extremely good work experience from Holland Park School, and they stopped it must be 6 or 7 years ago, which is a huge shame, and they ended up doing not very interesting things after that, trying to find, you know, fairly menial jobs, which isn't what they wanted at all. And as you say, good quality work experience is very, very important. I know the Clement James Centre either do it or used to do it for people who studied there. They got quite a few people into John Lewis doing bits of retail and merchandising, not just shop floor work. And some of those were extremely good because their training is brilliant. I just want to say here, actually, that I was reading through some of the information about the alternative provision in the borough, and I'm very sorry to say that they're still offering construction for boys, hairdressing and beauty for girls, and they really need to get their finger out on that, because not only some boys, I'm sure, would love to do hairdressing and beauty, and some girls would love to do construction, but they really have to widen their perspective on that. Yeah, we will be keeping up to date, and we will certainly, our new spokes will keep up for that. And I'm going to hand over to Councillor Ahmed now.
I'd just like to go back to the cost of living question, because I think it is relevant to this. There is opportunity to be creating more jobs that pay a London living wage and creating apprenticeships. As I mentioned earlier, other councils in South London have managed this. In Lambeth, for young people, just in the past 4 years, they've created 4,000 apprenticeships. And I just want to add that this isn't an unrealistic shopping list of demands. This is stuff that's being done by other councils across London, councils that are far less wealthy than this one. I think just as a bare minimum, we should be establishing a cost of living commission. We should be going out into the communities, those less affluent communities that we heard about, and actually engaging with residents and finding out what it is that they need, just like they've done in Wandsworth, for example, and actually working with our residents to find out how to design a service that actually best meets their needs around cost of living. I don't think it's sufficient.
Sorry, Councillor Ahmed, I thought this question was about young offenders are struggling to find meaningful employment pathways.
I was...
It is.
Right, okay, all right, then I'll finish there then. Thank you.
So you do have a minute, but talk relevantly to that question. If you don't...
No, I'll finish then.
Fine. In that case, we will move on to the final question.
Hello, my name's Iman. I've been the Youth Mayor since March 2020, and while I'm here, I'd like to thank some of the councillors we've worked with in the past year, specifically Councillor Soth, former Mayor Hargreaves, and Councillor Elizabeth, who have met with us numerous times and have been giving us like round-the-clock support ever since we joined in 2020. While I'm here, I'd like to remind you guys that the Youth Council does in fact exist. We have managed to successfully put out numerous of our policies, which you can read about later. However, I would like to remind you guys that we are here, and we would like you guys to, be more engaging. That obviously excludes the members I thanked previously. And I'd like to say that we don't do very well to brown-nosing. Young people are a very hard group to please, so we would like for you guys to act on your words. I think that would be amazing. And now to the final question. We'll get out of your hair soon. In terms of the Grenfell 5-year plan coming to an end and the closing of the curve, which did not go down very well, what are the council planning to do in the next 5 to 10 years to support young people, as there are many still battling with the ripple effects of the tragedy? Thank you.
Thank you, man. Lovely to see you again, and you've been a brilliant youth mayor. You're going to be a very, very hard act to follow. So good luck to who's next. And you've really set the high standards, so thank you. And it was great, you spoke at full council relatively recently. Maybe some members weren't here, but it really was, you spoke way better than most of us. So yes, your question is very, very important. And just before this meeting tonight, the leadership team had a meeting to discuss what happens after 2024 for the council's work, and also including provision for young people and children. And I can't report anything yet, to be honest, because it's very much, it's going to be a work in progress. We've agreed a framework, but we want lots and lots of conversations with everybody involved in the borough, including the Youth Council. So we're going to make sure that happens. But there is actually a youth forum for bereaved and survivors' children, and they do actually shape quite a lot of the services for them, specifically for that. And you asked about the curve. This was a very big decision, much debated within the community, the local community, and it was decided by the local community to stop it for its last year. And it has saved £1.3 million, and that is completely ring-fenced to be used for the local community. And again, it would be great to hear your views on that. There is going to be a curve steering committee, but we definitely and desperately need to hear young voices in that. So afterwards, we can make sure we kind of loop you in. It still hasn't been formed yet. It's still a work in progress. And just to reassure you that all the services that were previously at the curve have been relocated to nearby. Just down the road, there's Fit for Life, where they do a bit of boxing, which I won't go there, but I did try it once, and it's not my skill set. But they will be very, very happy to host a meeting for the Youth Council.
Councillor McVeigh.
I am done, but can I just quickly say, Grenfell Project Fund meeting next Tuesday. Please come along. Thank you. And everyone's welcome, obviously, to that.
That's 2 minutes.
Could I now call upon a member of the Labour group to respond?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, during the consultation with residents carried out by the council, three quarters of residents said the curve ought to remain open. And I'm sorry that those views were ignored, because the curve didn't need to close. The lease for the premises expired, but an alternative building could have been found, really. And it's not enough to say, I don't think, that those organisations working at the curve will carry on in different parts of the borough. Because it's actually really important for a traumatised community to have a space, a physical space where we can all congregate together and provide mutual support and empower each other. There is a consultation taking place to gather views about what the future legacy of Grenfell should look like. So far, the questions were developed without input from the councillors in North Kensington, as far as I'm aware of, or involving any kind of iterative process with the residents. But I am really hopeful that those questions will be redesigned with the residents in mind. It's really crucial that residents do have a dedicated space to raise their concerns directly with the council.
about the legacy and what happens to the tower itself. The Grenfell Scrutiny Committee and others would have been a place to do that, but unfortunately that's been scrapped. Myself and others in the Labour group are committed to having that reinstated. It was a manifesto pledge, in fact. And I agree with you, it is still a really traumatised community. There hasn't been much evaluation of the interventions that have been provided in terms of the mental health and wellbeing input. But from my own experience with it, I didn't find that what was offered was sufficient. 6 sessions of cognitive behavioural therapy for the scale of the trauma that many people in North Kensington have experienced isn't anywhere near enough. And I think we are looking forward to hearing what the council will be making available in terms of longer-term psychological support.
Thank you. Can I take this opportunity to thank all those questions? I'm not going to thank you by name, but collectively, thank you all very much for those well thought through and well presented questions. Thank you. Item number 7. Do members have any petitions to present? Item number 8, the statement by the Leader of the Council and a response by the Leader of the Minority Party. I now invite the Leader of the Council to address the meeting for up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, this is going to be short and sweet, as colleagues have a lot of business to get through and topics to cover. I'll also try and meet the standards set by our Youth Council members who spoke so eloquently and expertly earlier. I have to say, it's been great to have them here. I've met many of them before, and I'm grateful for their ideas, their energy, and for the positive view of what the world can be and what the borough can be. The future is very much theirs, and we must all think about how we contribute to that future in the Chamber and across the organisation. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to start with some thanks tonight. Over the last few days, the UK has been on the receiving end of the highest ever recorded temperatures. Uncomfortable nights, hot days, impacting work, childcare, and every area of life. Some of our schools have had to take the decision to close early. We had to bring forward bin collections to 5 a.m. in some cases to keep crews safe while making sure our residents got the service they rightfully expect. Behind the scenes, a huge number of officers got to work, making sure libraries, children's centres, community facilities were open, air-conditioned, and providing a place for people to hide from the heat, providing free sun cream for children, making hundreds of calls to the vulnerable and the elderly. The dedication of officers over the weekend, and particularly over the last 2 days, shows how much this authority cares about the people we serve and the way we serve them. Being the best council, we are demonstrating that ambition through action. And our infrastructure also survived the onslaught. Bridges, roads, pavements were checked on a regular basis and all remained open, testament to the many years of sound investment by this leadership team and our predecessors. Mr. Mayor, yesterday was a stark reminder to all of us that we need to continue to commit to net zero and tackle climate change collectively and be unrelenting in that aim. The Council's already started down this path, investing millions and helping people make greener choices, making it easier and cheaper for them to do so. Our Manifesto Commitments and our forthcoming Council plan outline this as a priority, and we will be writing to the 2 remaining candidates for Prime Minister to ask that this commitment is maintained both nationally and internationally. We will also be asking that investment in London is prioritised once again, in transport, in our own services, and that focus moves back to more power for local decision-making and local communities. Mr. Mayor, our response to the heatwave was caring, considerate, proactive, and we showed the competence and customer service that will be the hallmark of the next 5 years. We are focused on delivering a great deal over the next electoral cycle. We are making good on our promises, like reducing paperwork and restrictions, giving our businesses the freedom to lead the alfresco revolution that we started last summer. Building homes. Kim has been on several building sites in recent weeks, seeing new homes take shape. Strategies were written, plans were made, but now we have moved from desks to diggers, from biros to bricks, from paperwork to building work. And I'd like to congratulate him on his efforts, and there is still more to come. Mr. Mayor, our manifesto outlined a cleaner, greener, safer and fairer borough. We are on the right path, but we are not blind to the challenges. The cost of living, opportunities for young people, the economic recovery from pandemic. And I'm very pleased to say we have the right person in the chamber tonight to help take us where we want to be, to grasp the nettle of being the best council, a challenge set by bereaved and survivors from Grenfell Tower. As we've just appointed her, Maxine Holsworth joins us this autumn, and we're looking forward to her being with us and leading our workforce to help us achieve what I've set out this evening and more. I believe Maxine's appointment represents where we are as an organisation, learning from the past but looking to the future. She supported us in the aftermath of the tragedy in 2017. So she has those lessons and that experience in her DNA, in the same way this entire organisation needs to. And I am encouraged by her words on accepting the appointment. She says, being the best means being ambitious, consistently delivering excellent services, and having Grenfell recovery at the heart of it all. It will be up
Campbell,
to all
you
of
are
us.
reaching your 5 minutes.
Yes, I am. I've got
And-
2 more sentences.
But
Maxine says it'll be up to all of us to focus our efforts together with our partners, communities, residents and businesses. And Mr. Mayor, I could not agree more. Thank you.
Councillor Denko to respond, please, for 5 minutes and 15 seconds, should you so wish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A survey by the OECD has found that only half, 5 out of 10, of the UK population feel their voices are heard if a decision affecting their community is to be made by their local council. 4 in 10 trust local government. 3 in 10 trust national government. 2 in 10 trust political parties. We, in local government, politicians, have a lot of work to do to regain that trust. Meanwhile, the ambition for this council, agreed with Grenfell bereaved and survivors, is to be really progressive, listening, the best borough in the country. This seems to have been reinterpreted, and maybe I've got this wrong, as an aspiration to be the best council, which is something else entirely. It is self-regarding and inward-looking. I hear from senior councillors and officers from time to time that we're doing so much better, but I hear from residents across the borough that the council is back to business as usual. Mr. Mayor, this council is not in tune with the concerns of many of its residents. It does not hear the roar of frustration and even pain from those it serves. It continues to be deaf to their concerns. It continues to run deterministic consultations and dodgy surveys, and God help us if the most recent one being planned now is another dodgy one. We in the Labour group, however, are in tune with our communities because we are our communities. Planning. We should not underestimate the utter devastation that poorly determined planning permissions can visit on a neighbourhood subjected to years of digging, drilling, dust, traffic upheaval, pollution and vibration. The war of attrition that a powerful neighbour, whether an individual or a developer, wages against a community who want to preserve their views, their trees, their peace, is the same in Chelsea, in Knightsbridge, South Cairn, Earls Court, Holland Park or North Cairn. Crime. Right under our nose, Mr. Mayor, we have white-collar drug use and prostitution, crimes that are the tip of the iceberg of misery for so many, particularly the young men we are failing, who are society's whipping boys as they get caught for being delivery drivers of misery. Take a walk around Ken High Street at midnight and see the dark face of our beautiful borough, prostitutes scurrying into limousines to service Park Lane hotels. I've seen all this, by the way, as a first-person experience. The limos with furtive drivers waiting outside mansion blocks right under our nose. There's one right there on Kent High Street. The best council were doing nothing about this. Climate change. How shocking that climate change mitigation and prevention and the work towards carbon zero emissions is bottom of the list for our Tory leadership hopefuls. Bottom. So please tell your future leaders to reinstate the cycle lane and to take this more seriously. No wonder, really, the outgoing Prime Minister was partying yet again while London burns. How will they approach the imperative of keeping buildings not only warm in winter, but also cool in summer? Frankly, the Council has supported some appallingly bad decisions, and I draw your attention to the so-called vibrant neighbourhood in the making at Warrington Green, which my colleague is going to be speaking about shortly. There is a real possibility, if we have a cold winter, to add to the misery of so many, that we will have residents of the best councils freeze or starve to death. This isn't me saying this, this is voluntary organisations I'm in contact with. We have no contingency plans, apart from asking people to fill in forms and await their fate. Mr. Mayor, the past 3 years of government have been a catastrophe, with a Prime Minister who's the laughing stock of the world, 200,000 dead from COVID, many entirely avoidable, care home residents decimated, and we saw that in North Kent in the early months, inflation through the roof at nearly 10%, imports shackled by disastrous Brexit deals, and some exports nuked altogether, and a summer of strikes across the industries for a living wage could lead us into a winter of untold misery. But never mind, the alfresco revolution makes it all worthwhile. Mr. Mayor, there has been no culture change in this council. How disappointing, and most people see that. After 5 years, we are once again making plans. Please, let us wake up and do what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dent-Code. Item 9, the order of business. In accordance with standing orders, I rule that the order of business shall be as printed in the agenda. Item 10, reports from the leadership team. No reports have been referred by the leadership team. Item 11, reports of council-side committees. No reports have been referred to council from council-side committees. Item 12, matters referred to the council by scrutiny committees. The Housing and Communities Select Committee have referred the item COVID-19 Community Recovery Conference Key Insights and Recommendations report to the Council for information. I now invite Councillor Ali to speak to the report as the chair of that committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a councillor for Housing and Community Select Committee and as a Labour member, we have taken an important task on board. This is a clear indication or direction that the Labour members and the Labour scrutiny chairs have really delivered for this borough, and we will continue to deliver for this borough. I'd also like to thank members of my select committee for the hard work they have put into the committee and the work that we have done over the last few years. In particular, Councillor Greg Hammond, who I cannot see this evening. It will be really great to thank him for the work he's done, and a member of, as the Vice Chair of Housing and Community Select Committee. It's not been an easy time, and it's not been an easy task to make sure that we scrutinize the council, but also we stay out of politics at the same time. Because one thing is clear, Mr. Mayor, to us, is doing scrutiny is nothing about politics. It's to make sure that this borough becomes the best place to live and work and study, and also deliver, while also making sure that we'll hold the leadership accountable. The Select Committee have worked on the separate issues for the last few years, and most importantly, the housing, the communities, although housing, I would say, has been coming forward, and the lead member for housing sees himself as the most scrutinized, I think the communities hasn't been done justice. So we had an opportunity to scrutinize the communities, the team, the lead member for communities, and Councillor Ansaran was present a couple of meetings, and in fact most of the meetings, and we have decided to take a one-day scrutiny to add to make sure that council scrutiny is done properly. So we had a one-day scrutiny on the 7th of March 2022, and we looked into the food insecurity. We also looked into what can be done in terms of a Grenfell recovery, Mr. Mayor. So moving forward, I'm pleased to say that we have 5 recommendations, and most of them recommendation has been passed forward, and I'm sure the members of this council, of this chamber, have already read. And I'm grateful to the new communities lead member, Councillor Soph McVeigh, who have accepted all our recommendations and shows that when we have to work together, we can actually implement one of the important that we can do. So the housing and communities will continue, Mr. Mayor, to do the work. We will continue to make sure that we scrutinize the lead members. We will not only just scrutinize the communities, but the housing is also number 1 for our communities. And I will commend this recommendation to the council, and the council to note it, and hopefully the lead member for communities to as fully accepted before, and to look forward to scrutinizing further to make our borough the best place to work and live for future generation and this current generation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Does any other member wish to speak? Is the report noted? Item 13, proposed appointment to the Independent Ethics Panel. Item 13, proposed appointment to the Independent Ethics Panel. I now call upon Councillor Campbell to move the reception of the report.
I'd like to move the reception, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor Taylor-Smith to second. I now call upon Councillor Campbell to speak for up to 5 minutes.
I don't need to speak.
Does any other member wish to speak for up to 5 minutes? I take it, Councillor Campbell, you don't want to sum up either. I now put the recommendation that the Council appoints Mark Jarvis as an independent person and as a member of the Ethics Panel to the vote. Would those for the recommendation as set out in the report please show? Would those against please show? Are there any abstentions? Given that the majority have voted in favour, I declare the recommendation as set out in the report agreed. Item 14, questions asked of lead members. I've been notified of 1 question. I now invite Councillor Ali to ask his question and Councillor Taylor-Smith to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, we know what has been happening in our borough, especially as I've earlier mentioned, the Holland Park issue and the school. This may also be relevant to Councillor Catherine Fox, since she's the lead member for Family and Children. So I hope the Mayor will allow if there are 2 answers to my question. On that regard, the hostile takeover I have mentioned before for the United Learning is now progressing to the final stage. On paper, Mr. Mayor, we know the decision to give United Learning to Holland Park hasn't been made yet by the Ministerial. And we know the Secretary of State. How many Secretaries of State we had for education? I can't remember the last time we had so many, or 3 of them. And, I'm not blaming the Prime Minister doing what he does. Of course, the blame is on him. As everyone knows that he should be leading this country to the better, so that we at least have ministers and secretaries who can do better for this country. The fact now that the decision has not been made, United Learning have been writing to the parents and telling them that they are taking over the school. So I would like to know how come they can write in agreement with the governance of the school, the governing body. But that's not the only question that I had, Mr. Mayor. The most important question is the lease, signing the lease with the United Learning. I think it's important for this council, as we've agreed before, as a joint motion, this is the important, and this is the decision making that I hope the lead member will answer, that we will not sign a lease with United Learning, and then we will have the safety net for our borough and our community. I'll finish off, Mr. Mayor, so that we can have a KAA, and this council will support
Councillor
KAA.
Ali, what is your question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll rephrase it again. Will the lead member sign a lease with United Learning? That's my question.
Thank you.
Hopefully the answer will be no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'm not sure what the etiquette on this, but I just wanted to thank Councillor Simmons for what was her maiden speech. I don't know if that constitutes a maiden answer to a question, but anyway, thank you. So, I want to just acknowledge that. So, it's a question of legality, Councillor Kassim, is that the building is owned by the borough, the land is owned by the borough. There is currently an agreed lease between the borough and the school. But the lease contains a condition in terms of certain works that need to be completed for the lease to then be granted. So at the moment, the school is occupying under a tenancy at will, subject to that, but we've agreed all the terms. Now, the only reason the terms hadn't been agreed is we had the intervention of what's going on now. We had agreed terms in terms of how that was going to be then settled. So ordinarily, we have a legal agreement that the school can just accept and the lease can then be granted. It's not a question of signing it. It was signed many times ago. So I think the other question, which is something that we will take further advice on, and we can have a conversation about what happens when there is this transfer. And my understanding is that the school would transfer to the new trust on a standard academy lease. However, the DfE could opt to take the lease, or it could sublet it to UL or any other operator. That's their decision, that's not ours. And there is a payment provision, as I mentioned, that was agreed as far as the capital programme, which finalises the negotiations of the ongoing works and would allow the lease, the existing lease that's been signed, to be granted. But this payment would only be made once the lease has effectively been completed. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit fuzzy. I'm sorry if I can't give you an unequivocal answer, but I can confirm that the lease has been signed. But I will respond in more detail when we understand what the legal process will be on that transfer. Thank you.
Councillor Ali, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor. I wish to know when the lease was signed. Was it signed after United Learning has been indicated to take over the school, or before the school was handing over to United Learning?
Thank you.
Thank you. The lease was signed many years ago when the construction contract and the building was being built. That was the basis of the council and its involvement in the construction. So the lease has been signed many years ago.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor-Smith. Item 15, matters of local concern raised under Standing Order 11. Does any member wish to raise a matter under Standing Order 11 and speak for up to 2 minutes? I know that Councillor Gardner does, I know that Councillor Lowry does, but does any other councillor so wish? Councillor Bakhtiar. I think Councillor Bakhtiar that the limit is 3 Conservatives from the Majority Party and 1 from the Minority Party. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I'd like to take a minute to reflect on parklets, the wooden structures which popped up during COVID times to allow restaurants to offer increased external dining. They've proved a lifeline to many businesses and residents, and I think alike, and they've proved, on the whole, very welcome. But we're now some time on, and some have been left to look like discarded shacks, hardly used, taking up car parking spaces and blocking views to commercial businesses who rely on passing trade, whether by car or on foot. In Pembridge, we have a few in Westbourne Grove and opposite in Ledbury Road. Some are well kept, but some tend to collect rubbish and are deserted. What can we do to smarten them up, remove the redundant ones, and maybe, even dare I say it, try some tables and chairs on the pavements instead? And then also, if we could take the opportunity to look at how we could amend the disconnect. So, for example, if something goes wrong with one of these parklets, you can land up getting 3 enforcement teams in one night. The noise nuisance, the highways safe streets enforcement team, and separately the licensing team. So for me, I think it would be wonderful if we could just smarten up the high street a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Lowry.
Before I get started, point of correction, Councillor Thalasitis, for as long as I exist, you won't be the youngest on this council, I'm afraid. Mr Mayor, I'm speaking in support of the residents in the Warnington Green estate in my ward who have endured the most horrific burden of physical and environmental vandalism to their estate over the past decade under the watchful gaze of this council who approved the application in 2010. The destruction of 272 mature trees across the estate to replace them with a few saplings is repellent, as the protests and fierce resistance in Athlone Gardens confirms, and many of you, or most of you, will be familiar with these plans. No praise can therefore be too high for the work of the Warnington Trees campaigners who, through radical and uncompromising community activism, have garnered borough-wide support for protecting the natural environment in their area. Athlone Gardens was once a beautiful and cherished area of our public realm. Now, since the felling of over 250 trees, while this council watched idly by, Athlone Gardens has been reduced to a dust bowl. All this was done before the council agreed alternative shade for the summer, while our residents endure some of the hottest weather on record. This is a scandal. Therefore, we are asking the council to commit to erecting gazebos or other shelters in Athlone Gardens so that our residents can be protected from the intense heat and sun. The new flats on the estate with huge windows are intolerably hot, so residents cannot bear to stay indoors and are desperate for shade. As we hopefully emerge into a post-COVID world, issues of increased home working, the need for better public space and more pollution-absorbing trees, and a peaceful natural environment on our doorstep is now essential. This act of environmental vandalism is widely perceived by the local community as yet another example of the way the residents of North Kensington are treated, a hard-pressed community which has experienced a decade of austerity and the tragedy of Grenfell Tower. Please, do something to protect our residents in my ward in this weather.
Thank you, Councillor Lowry. We now move on to item 16, motions. Members will see that we have 6 motions printed in the agenda. Motion 1 is the subject of the housing nomination scheme. I've been notified that Councillor Verboven has unfortunately been taken ill and is therefore unable to second the motion. Therefore, we will move straight to the second motion on the agenda, and that motion will go to the top of the October meeting. I also want to point you to motion number 4, the care of the Afghan and Ukrainian refugees in RBKC, and I've been notified by Councillor Ahmed that she wishes to withdraw the 4th motion as printed on the agenda. But the Council needs to agree to the motion being withdrawn. Does the Council agree to it being withdrawn? Thank you. So now, improvements to the street scene. Motion 2 is the subject of improvements to the street scene. I now call upon Councillor North formally to move the motion standing in his name, and Councillor Adorian to second it.
Move. I beg to move.
Beg to second, Mr. Mayor.
I now invite Councillor North to speak for up to 5 minutes. It is his maiden speech, so please can all councillors be considerate during it, and I would make that as a general observation. There are going to be a number of councillors making their maiden speeches. Please be quiet during a maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the Council and members of the public, for allowing my maiden speech today to propose a motion on a local issue that I feel very strongly about, and I hope will gain unanimous support across the Chamber. It will make a difference in tackling a growing problem that our residents are telling us they want us to deal with. But before I introduce my motion, I would like to thank the residents of Camden Ward for placing their faith in me to represent them. Camden is a very special part of our Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea. I'm also grateful to be working with 2 great colleagues, Councillor Catherine Folkes and Councillor Pretty Hudd. You don't always get to choose the candidates that you work with, but I can honestly say that I feel fortunate to work with 2 dedicated and above all very kind people. Together, we are a united force for the residents of Camden Ward. I would also like to pay tribute to our 2 predecessors, who are not just outstanding representatives for our ward and our borough, but they have been generous with their time and their support. So I thank Ian Wason and Robert Freeman for their years of service to our community. Public service to any community is something special. Being elected to serve as a member of this council on the Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea is truly an honour and a privilege. But the elections are over. We have a clear duty to work together, and as already been said, to be the best council. As a proud London-born resident, I've always felt that we are fortunate to live in the best borough of our great capital city. Our history, diverse culture, public buildings, world-famous parks, outstanding schools and public services all add up to make Kensington and Chelsea our home. But above all, I feel it's the people that make our community so admired across this city. I would also like to recognise the officers and staff here at the Town Hall. Many of our new councillors have remarked how friendly the welcome has been. The support and the training that is offered has been effective to help us represent our residents. So thank you. My first piece of casework in Camden Ward was something that I know frustrates many of our residents, so this motion is something that is close to my heart. Residents told us that they value our clean streets. However, in too many areas, from North Kensington to Earl's Court down to Chelsea, across the borough, there's been an increase in the graffiti on our streets. In many of our wards, residents have told us that they put antisocial behaviour and in particular graffiti near the top of their list of local problems that they want us to better tackle. But I ask that this motion is not just words or best intentions. I believe we can do better. In some areas, there has been a noticed spike in graffiti, not the art type, but the gang tag type. So first of all, there is the red tape. Getting the wall or property owner to either remove it or give permission has so far been problematic. Our residents want a tougher approach in removing graffiti and in some cases protecting that surface to avoid future graffiti or making it easier to remove if repeated. I propose this motion, which I genuinely hope will have all political parties to agree and support. Together we can make a difference to better tackle the graffiti in our borough. Thank you.
Congratulations, Councillor North, on your maiden speech. Councillor Dorian, would you like to speak at this point?
I would, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, may I congratulate Councillor North on his excellent maiden speech. I know he will be and is an excellent councillor for Camden, and I'm very pleased to be seconding his first motion. Before I say anything else, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank the residents of Earl's Court for returning me to represent them on this council, and I look forward to serving them to the best of my abilities over the next 4 years. Mr. Mayor, it's perhaps a well-worn stereotype of local councillors that one of the things we like to talk about is graffiti. And unfortunately, it is often for good reason. We're not talking about popular street art that has the consent of the community, and dare I say, the landlord. What we're talking about is vandalism. It's about criminal gangs tagging their so-called territory or simply individuals already well on their way towards a life of crime. Last year, Mr. Mayor, we held a small community graffiti clean-up event in Earl's Court with a group of volunteers, and one of the spots we cleaned was a closed doorway of a closed gym on Earl's Court Road. Volunteers spent probably a good few hours scrubbing and cleaning as much as we could, and we felt we'd done a good job at the end of the day. The very next morning, the graffiti was back. Now, members may well ask, well, why should we spend time and money on graffiti removal? Is it not a lost cause? But I would say let's consider the cost of not cleaning it up, of allowing it to spread, the feelings of insecurity for residents, loss of local business and visitor confidence, emboldening criminals who then feel that they have found a soft target for their other more serious activities. Catching and arresting the taggers aside, entire motion in itself, I'm assuming, the best way of stopping them from returning is to remove their handiwork as quickly as possible. Let's channel resources, unblock the approvals process, the permissioning process, which has been causing difficulties, and perhaps even involve some of those great local volunteers as well, alongside targeted professional cleaning. Thank you.
I now wish to open the debate up to debate and call upon any other councillors who wish to speak. I know that Councillor Will Lane has indicated. Is he here? In that case, either Councillor Wade or Councillor Hargreaves or Councillor Aretti. Councillor Hargreaves. Then Councillor Wade.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed, and I very much support this motion tonight, and particularly the bit about graffiti as a main issue here. I think we've all seen in our wards right across the borough a huge increase in the graffiti that is actually distasteful, that actually sometimes can be quite vulgar and even offensive. And I think we need to find a way of making it much easier for us as a council to get private landlords, private people who own of buildings, to actually remove that graffiti. We've had great campaigns in the past about grot spots, about fly tipping, and when we focused on that and we put energy and resources behind it, we've managed to make a huge difference. I don't know whether S215 can be used in this capacity. I'd need to take some advice on that. But actually those landlords who own buildings with offensive graffiti on it, actually we can take action to remove that graffiti and get them to refund us in the future. I don't know whether that can be taken, but if it can, we need to look into it. I just think we need to get much tougher on actually removing this graffiti because our residents find it distasteful, plus also it's unsightly. Yes, there's some great street art around, and actually that enlivens about an area. That can actually add to it. But the graffiti is just totally unacceptable, and I think as a borough we need to get much tougher. So I do support this motion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Hargreaves. Councillor Wade.
Thank you. Oh, the wrong mic's come on. I think I'm on this one. Thank you. Or do you want me to change places? I welcome this debate on graffiti and congratulate Councillor North for his maiden speech. For some months, I've been in contact with officers to address the problem of graffiti in Earls Court. I've had various responses to why there's been little or no intervention, and welcome any initiative that will find a long-lasting solution. I've been told there's an epidemic of graffiti in the borough, but going to other wards, they do not appear to be suffering to the same level of graffiti as in Earls Court. Where you have a high level of multiple occupancy with off-site freeholders, it's hard to locate them. But I would have thought the graffiti is actually reducing their rental and market value, and that must be one way to get to them. There's a question of manpower. I've suggested that there's been a supervised team of these undertaken by community safety orders, volunteers. Graffiti is hard to remove, and some of the pigments used and the nature of brick or stucco must be taken into consideration, as we know for having done 3 graffiti and team Earls Court days with Hamish, Malcolm, and a lot of residents. It's not sufficient, and we need a more systematic and consistent borough approach to address the problem. The removal of graffiti is one of the strands that is required to support the regeneration of Earls Court Road, which is suffering from neglect and decline, with businesses, visitors and residents commenting on how the area has changed over the last few years. This is increasingly visible with the number of empty retail shops and the reduction of the quality in retail offered to residents. We have to take this seriously because with the emphasis of the Earls Court Development Company in their presentations is on North End Road, and that has the potential that the high street for the Earls Court site being delivered in Hammersmith and Fulham, and the Lily Bridge Depot becoming a restaurant, food court destination, or we'll have to act or we will be sidelined. There are many consultations being undertaken by ECDC and the Council, but they all relate to the site. None relate to how we need to ensure that Earls Court Road is integrated into the site and benefits from the uplift from the development. I would therefore ask that there's a commercial vision or strategy undertaken for Earls Court that would set objectives and establish commercial development plan in collaboration with freeholders of retail units and define key implementation steps. This would include graffiti busting, effective cleaning of Earls Court Road pavements, as well as supporting shopfront improvements. This strategy should also capture and raise awareness of potential markets and the demographics of the area, including the new development, and contribute to help stop the tide of adult gaming and betting shops, massage parlours and takeaways. Unfortunately, the S106 funding of the Earls Court Business Forum did not entirely generate the results that many would have wished for. as adversely impacted by COVID, and therefore additional funding is required to continue and complete what has been started. Unless we invest, one of the first sights that many will have of the borough is graffitied covered West Cromwell Road, graffiti on columns going down Earls Court Road, dirty, broken and uneven pavements. That does not promote the borough or any recovery for Earls Court, which has suffered from many things, such as the closure of the exhibition centre. So we do need to be reassured that there's money and expertise to invest in an area going through transition. A period with active intervention, positive change is possible. The obvious governance forum and delivery arm of this commercial venture is the Earls Court Business Forum. That should be providing direction, drive and coordination across the various stakeholders, including funding, providing achievement and agreed objectives across the borough and across the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Councillor Schmetterling, followed by Councillor Oretti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I congratulate the responsible team for the improved yet price-reduced waste contract. This is a great motion, and I congratulate Councillor North on his excellent maiden speech. I appreciate that there are far more important things going on in the world right now, even close to us in Europe, and I'm glad that we as a council are doing what we can. However, in the council we focus on borough matters, and at a local level, Pembridge is among the top wards affected by graffiti, and adjacent Colville is another. Of course, Earls Court is another one of those. And any measure to speed up removal will be very much welcomed by the local residents. A week ago today, I participated in a Portobello Road walk, led by senior officers and joined by some ward councillors and the lead member for Planning, Place and Environment. Particularly when cleaning up graffiti on commercial and private property, we have to be mindful of legal procedures and potentially negative consequences. After all, the council has been sued for damages in the past. So I was very pleased to learn that a way has been found to expedite the removal, at least on rendered and painted surfaces, of which there are many. The sooner this is implemented, the better. Faster removal from other surfaces like brick is being considered. I leave the disclosure of the details to the lead member. I call on the Chamber to support this motion wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Councillor Oretti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I firstly congratulate friend Councillor Lloyd on his maiden speech and Councillor Adorian for bringing this motion forward. Mr. Mayor, I've dealt with many cases in Holland in terms of removal of graffiti. It became extremely difficult dealing with the landlords. And it's not only that the council is responsible, partly, to remove it, but it also put big strain on our council funds removing the graffiti. So I think I welcome this motion, but dealing with landlords has become extremely difficult, especially it took weeks for one of the issues that we were dealing with. And I think as a council as a whole, two groups should come together to find out a solution, and anything that's a sensible idea would really, I would welcome the idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Oretti. Does any other councillor wish to speak? In which case, I now invite Councillor Kamali as the lead member to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And thank you to Councillor North on his maiden speech. I know this is an issue close to his heart, and to Councillor Adorian for raising this issue here tonight. Thank you also to all the other councillors that are consistently filling up my phone storage with photos of graffiti, bins on the pavement, and businesses that aren't quite playing by the rules. This side of the chamber, Mr. Mayor, stood on a manifesto that included continuing to deliver twice-weekly bins and a high-quality street scene. These commitments benefit 100% of our borough residents and also the multitudes of visitors and workers who come to RBKC on a daily basis. We have demonstrated our commitment to this cause by renegotiating our waste contract, maintaining twice-weekly bins, as well as our other high-quality services with regards jet washing, street sweeping, and of course our support for Carnival. This was all the whilst delivering £1.5 million per annum in savings, showing that efficiency in contract management and procurement can go hand in hand with high-quality, ubiquitous public service. We are fortunate too that in RBKC, by consistently investing in public realm, we have some of the highest quality streets and places in London, from Golborne Road to the north down to Pavilion Road in the south. Councillors on my right will also be aware of the improvements currently being carried out in St Helens, which were widely supported in consultation, with further improvements scheduled for Bute Street and Chelsea Green within this financial year. Residents from all wards routinely write in to thank our officers for the level of service we deliver. Again, very, very frequently this week, we've had a number of emails from residents commending the staff for being out in the heat, but getting the job done. It is a service, however, that can sometimes be taken for granted, not least as our bins and streets continue to remain clear during lockdowns and more recently during the warm weather. It's also true to say we do often see increased demand for additional resourcing, such as the nature of becoming used to a service. It is, however, worth remembering and reminding residents that nearby Camden and Brent only collect the bins once a fortnight, leaving it to pile up in the sun for days on end. And H&F, for all their talk, only accomplish it weekly. This has a knock-on effect to the visual amenity of an area, whilst also encouraging further fly tipping and a circular degradation of pride in one's home and community. Whilst offering these well-regarded services, we have, however, seen a recent uptick in graffiti across the borough, notably during the lockdowns where streets were less busy and police and enforcement teams were rightly disposed with other issues. Whilst I'm entirely sympathetic to the artistic merits of some works, the vast majority of these are done on private property without the owner's consent and against their wishes. Residents are then faced with a choice: spend their own money bringing their property back up to a standard, or accept the graffiti forevermore. We in RBKC don't believe this is a fair situation for our residents or business owners to find themselves in. Myself and officers recently went on a walkabout of Portobello Road, as referenced by Councillor Schmetterling, with local residents to discuss how we could tackle these issues and identify some of the problem areas. Mr. Mayor, we believe we can simplify and streamline the process of removing graffiti across the borough and rapidly bring down the levels in certain hotspots referenced here tonight, at nil additional cost to the council. We are also looking at ways of designing out these issues, for example, using specifically placed greenery to make what was previously a hotspot less desirable as a space to return to. To that end, we will be trusting on our teams to remove the graffiti wherever and whenever they see fit, keeping RBKC the beautiful place that it is. Thank you.
Councillor Kamali, thank you. I now invite Councillor North to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everybody for what seems to be universal support. I'll be very brief. I don't need to take the full 5 minutes, but I will say that I think that one area that we could focus and make a start of this is a very distinctive area between two wards, Earls Court and Abingdon, and with two councils, Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea. There is a bridge on the West Cromwell Road which is covered from front to back with graffiti. All of it is gang tags. I would like to see that bridge cleaned. Whichever bit is run by us, we will clean. Whichever bit is run by Labour-controlled Hammersmith and Fulham, I expect them to clean it. So I would like our people watching in on this, our residents, to see we mean business, and I thank you for your support.
Councillor North, thank you. I now put the motion to the vote. Would those for the motion please show? Would those against the motion please show? There were no abstentions, so I declare the motion carried. I'm now going to hand over for this next motion on schools exclusions among black and mixed ethnic students to Councillor Evans, the Deputy Mayor, because she used to chair the Families and Children's Select Committee.
Good evening. I look forward to chairing this motion, which is a matter very close to all of our hearts. Motion 3 is on the subject of school exclusions among black and mixed ethnic students. I call on Councillor Denko to formally move the motion standing in her name, and Councillor Thaxter to second, please.
I wish to second, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Denko to speak for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and congratulations to Councillor North, a very long-awaited maiden speech. I know he's tried several times to get on the council. Bless you for being here. I'm sure you're going to be amazing. So, Madam Mayor, we're at a turning point in our approach to secondary education in the borough. After a massive campaign by, at first, students, then parents, teachers, and now local councillors, and how good it is to live in unity once in a while, a decision will be made about the future of Holland Park School tomorrow. Whatever decision is reached, just how can we commit to anything when United Learning, if it is indeed there, does not listen to parents' concerns? Organisation Race on the Agenda tells us that aside from the disproportionate percentage of BAME and Gypsy, Romney and Irish traveller students who are excluded from school temporarily or permanently, they also suffer unrecorded informal exclusions that cannot be traced within the academy system. Let's be clear, informal exclusions are unlawful, and yet they happen. We know they happen in the borough. We can't fix what we can't see. How on earth do we find out about them? The detailed report on exclusions from Family and Children's Services Committee in June 2020 confirmed what we all knew and feared. Boys, and especially BAME boys and GRT students, are most likely to be excluded, but also this report also raised a very serious issue that I didn't know about myself, about special educational needs and statemented children. Why on earth, in a decent society, are we excluding children from school whose educational and behavioural challenges cannot be considered under their control? I find it utterly bizarre and shameful, frankly. All young people who face a lifetime, who are excluded from school, face a lifetime of discrimination and also loss of confidence. It affects their mental health. They can be targets of grooming gangs at alternative provision, and all kinds of other issues to do with their education. The Kensington Chelsea Foundation report, November 2021, Poverty and Prosperity in Kensington and Chelsea, says this organisation, Just for Kids Law, more than 8 out of 10 children in custody have been excluded, which is shameful, really. And they also go on to say, when exclusion happens, the route is from exclusion to prison. So the comment that we've so often heard from people saying that alternative provision can be a crime academy is true, according to these reports. Many of us in the Labour group know families who've been affected, and we know young people who have gone through alternative provision and are in jail. I'm sorry to say that includes myself and some of my colleagues today. Young people whose lives have been blighted by very poor response to the needs that their very clear needs that they had at different times. I'm sorry to say the amendment that has been put forward is not going to be supported by us. We want our children kept in school, and we are not going to support it. Bizarrely, the amendment has also deleted some facts which have been proven about our very poor rates within the borough, and that's quite strange that an amendment has deleted some facts. So Madam Mayor, if we are to hand over custodianship of our near £100 million Holland Park School to an unaccountable organisation, we will have no means to influence how United Learning conducts itself towards our vulnerable children. We will just have to ask nicely and hope they listen to Councillor Fawkes. So no more alternative provision, please. I read a letter from one of the ones who used to run in our borough, which said, to paraphrase, send us more children, we're not making enough money. And that's how many of them function. That's true, I've got a copy of it. So I know Hammersmith and Fulham are working towards a different way of dealing with these vulnerable children, but fabulous Southwark Council is the first local authority, has just been announced a few days ago, to stop excluding students altogether. They do not exclude students unless they are a physical danger to anybody. It's the first local authority in the country, and they've signed up to an agreement. They discussed this with local police and various other
Thank you very much.
organisations. Can I just finish my last few lines? Madam Mayor, we can do better and we must do better for the benefit of our current and future students. We keep our children in school. Thank you.
Very well. And just a point that we gave you 2 extra sentences as we did the lead member. So it's fair. Sina, thank you. Councillor Thaxter, do you wish to speak at this point?
I wish to speak briefly, Madam Mayor, because I'll give you back your 3 minutes or your 2 minutes from Councillor Evidenko, because what I'm going to say is very simple. We are aware of the problem. Oh, thank you, Councillor North, for your lovely maiden speech. We are aware of the impact of exclusion to our community, and this is something very close to my heart. I've been thinking, we do know what to do, we're just taking too long to act on these sort of issues. And I've got a few questions because I don't really like to talk the same thing over and over when we already know. Are these research a way of finding jobs for a certain group? What is the purpose of these ongoing studies when the situation is not changing? Are we using the funding to create jobs for relatively privileged people? We already know the impact of these exclusion on the lives changes and the impact of their families and society. Whose idea is it to think they can design more and more studies about exclusion will help our young people? Does the borough have a quota, and what is that for? We need to work with local organizations who have already been doing the job for years, like Just Solution Matters CIC and Stop Reinventing the Wheel. I mean, when are we going to start giving the funds to those who need it and can facilitate this sort of population? I mean, we know that the black and white working class family are mostly affected. When are we going to start giving the funding to those who need it and not to those who want to talk about it? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Members will see that an amendment has been submitted. I now call on Councillor Fawkes to propose the amendment and Councillor Yankson to second.
I move to propose, Madam Mayor.
I move to second, Madam Mayor.
I now invite Councillor Fawkes to speak up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate my colleague, Councillor North, for his excellent maiden speech. And what a commitment to get. He's just arrived and already he's changed our graffiti policy. So fantastic, really, really good. And I'd also like to thank Emma and the Labour Group for bringing this really, really important issue to our attention. It is something that we take really, really seriously because obviously we would, like you, not like any of our children to end up in being excluded from anything. But we know it's not necessarily as easy as just saying we don't want it to happen. In fact, in this borough, we are, when you look at statistics, statistics, you can read them in different ways. And actually, the statistics that you're looking at the moment are from 2019, and we actually haven't. We're just about to get the most recent numbers. And so we don't really know what's going to happen after COVID. But in 2019, we were already seeing our numbers drop. and actually we were in line with both the fixed term exclusions and the permanent exclusions. We are in line with the national average. Although we are high up in London, we're not necessarily a real outlier. But we absolutely need to acknowledge that the attainment gap between white pupils and BAME pupils is narrowing, but it does still exist. It's very difficult to have a blunt interpretation of BAME students, because actually when you look at the data across, some BAME students are the most excluded and some actually have the highest attendance rates. So it sort of goes across, and actually some white British people are also quite high up on the exclusion rates. But it is something that is so important to us that we have just published, in fact launched last week, this school inclusion strategy, which I really encourage you to all go and read. I hope there's some copies outside, but we're going to send you a link to the inclusion strategy. And in the inclusion strategy, there are 26 actions that the Council commits to taking to really make sure that we can do everything that we can to keep our pupils included. It's an inclusion strategy. We don't want to see more pupils being removed from our mainstream education. We want to keep them there. So our research shows, and what you've already mentioned, is that children who have experienced trauma, poverty, boys from a Black Caribbean background, or children with special education needs are more likely to be excluded than other pupils. And so we've developed a strategy that we hope will specifically help target that cohort of people. And the strategy is really working with a trauma-informed strategy. And in fact, I notice, having looked at the commitment that Southwark have made with theirs, that they are using a trauma-informed strategy to have no exclusions. And a trauma-informed strategy works by using the understanding that we know that a children's lived experience is so much more just than what happens to them in school. I mean, things will have happened to them at birth, through their family, through their experience of living in this country. There are all sorts of things that can affect children's behaviour in school. And those are the things that we want to work with multi-agencies, everybody who is working with our children, to address how we can help look at those issues and support them through it. Schools themselves really can't be the solution. It has to be systemic, multi-agency interventions, such as school governors, social workers, and everyone who are wrapping around the child at the centre to find out what's happening with that child and how can we make an early intervention to stop them being excluded. So I'm excited to see that happening and that we're already introducing that. But we've also got to break down the stigma that some parents have about talking about this. So to do that, we're working with Clement James, who are going to provide an advocacy service to support parents to understand what's happening and to work with schools. But a quick reminder, in this borough, we have excellent grant-maintained schools, 38 state-funded schools, of which 93% are good and outstanding, and our schools deliver performances well above London and national levels. And actually, this is a really important thing, that we have the smallest attainment gap for students eligible for free school meals.
Thank you very much,
anywhere
Councillor
in the
Fox.
country, and I've got 2 more sentences
That's
to come.
all you get.
So we are committed to a whole partner approach to tackle this issue, and thank you for raising it with us.
Councillor Yankson, do you wish to speak?
Councillor, Madam Mayor, I do wish to speak at this time.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to congratulate Councillor North on his excellent maiden speech. And I would like to second this very important motion in this House. The key things that came out of the report that I read were that, and I think the whole chamber will agree with me, that teachers who are making these exclusions are at the centre of our educational system. I've never been a teacher, but I've obviously been a pupil. But if you look into some of the detail, which in this report, you'll see that some 24% of the exclusions in this borough were caused by actual violence on teachers and students and the threat of violence. on teachers and students. And it must be right that I think across the chamber we would all agree that teachers must have the ability to exclude students that are violent to them or violent to other students in the classroom. And that must be right, and I think we'd all agree on that point. So on the basis that the teachers are excluding pupils who, in 21 in 4 cases it's because of violence, this is a very, very important motion, and if you read the report as I have, you'll see that there are a number of very strong interventions that this council is looking to make. The second one on the list is what I call upstream. Councillor Foakes has very, very eloquently put the point that it isn't just the child in the classroom, it's what happens before they get to the classroom. I simplify that in my terms by saying that it's the family and what happens with the family. And this council cares, and this council wants to make sure that exclusions will go down if you make sure that that child gets to the classroom and actually wants to learn. So I would very much hope that you'd support this motion and this amendment, because I think it's very, very clear that if we can make sure that we are doing work upstream, when that child actually gets to the classroom, they're less disruptive, want to learn, and therefore won't be excluded. So even though there are higher numbers of black and mixed ethnic race who are being excluded, it is very clear that this council wants to make sure that we can go upstream to make sure that the problems that they take to the classroom can be dealt with and dealt with head on. And then the final point that Councillor Foakes mentioned, which is about advocacy. When you look at the form that the teacher must complete before an exclusion is made, I think it's paragraph 4, it talks about if there's any discrimination that's gone ahead with that child being excluded, the parent has more forms of redress and the parent can actually take action. And as Councillor Foakes said, there's an advocacy group that helps parents if they think that there's been discrimination against their child simply because of race that has then led to them being excluded. And I want to make it very clear that if a child is doing something violent to a teacher or to a pupil, they have to be excluded of any colour, and that cannot be right because it's disruptive and dangerous to the teacher, but it also prevents the other pupils from learning. So the very important point about when race is mentioned is that it is very clear that if parents feel that there's a particular gripe against their particular child for a particular reason, they have the resources, they have the ability to go and actually take some action and get something done. So I would ask you to support the amendment to this motion on 2 bases, really because we want to make sure we can go upstream and stop any problems getting into the classroom, but secondly, make sure that if the parents feel that there's something to do with race involved, they have a place to go to actually get something done. And I commend that to the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now open the motion and amendment up to debate. The first councillor who wishes to speak is Councillor Hudd.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and congratulations to my excellent colleague, Councillor Northorne, in his maiden speech. Well done. We are all privileged to live in this borough with some exceptional primary and secondary schools. We also live in one of the most cosmopolitan boroughs in the country. This means there is a high proportion of children for whom English is an additional language. Unlike my colleagues, I will be stating some statistics, so it might be a bit boring. The proportion of children who have English as an additional language, 55% in primary schools and 46% in secondary schools in RBKC, compared to 49% and 41% respectively in England. Of course, there are other factors at play in exclusion, including children living in relative poverty. 24% of pupils in RBKC are eligible for free school meals, compared to 17% in England. Households in temporary accommodation, 28% in RBKC, compared to 3% in England. And children in need due to family stress, dysfunction, or absent parenting, 164 per 10,000 in RBKC, compared to 94 per 10,000 in England. Some of these factors can play a major role in pupils being excluded. Needless to say, the impact of exclusion on any pupil is detrimental, as sometimes the only stability in a pupil's life is provided entirely by school alone. Exclusion can also be very heavily impacted on parents, not just emotionally, but financially too, as they have to make time to go and see members of staff, take time off work, and make allowances for the welfare of their child. Therefore, RBKC is absolutely committed to our inclusion policy as set out in the latest Borough School Inclusion Strategy by Councillor Josh Randall for RBKC, Tim Barnes from Westminster, and Sarah Newman, Executive Director of Children's Services for both boroughs. In addition, Ofsted has recently rated SEN within RBKC as outstanding. We also have a strong Family Services Scrutiny Committee, which holds leadership and council to account and ensures that the inclusion strategy is implemented. The complexities of school exclusions have increased further due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Many schools will have amended their behaviour policy to incorporate government guidelines, and of course, due to social distancing, the digital divide will have greater than ever impact on many students receiving the education remotely. In some cases, the extended period of time without going into school may have exacerbated vulnerabilities, including social anxiety, and will have made it harder for some children and young people to return to school this year. In conclusion, the reason for exclusions are very nuanced, and tackling this issue can be very challenging. I strongly support this motion as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hudd. I now call on Councillor Ahmed.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think in addition to the disproportionate impact on students who are black, we know that children excluded from schools are 10 times more likely to have a psychiatric diagnosis, so specifically depression, anxiety, autism, and ADHD, 4 times more likely to have grown up in poverty, and twice as likely to have been taken into care due to an unsafe environment at home where they themselves, where the child themselves has experienced violence from a carer. So this disruptive or violent behaviour that we're seeing from the child needs to be understood in the context of the significant deprivation and mental health needs of children that we're failing to meet. So rather than just locate the problem in the child and trying to put as much distance between the child and the rest of society, because ultimately that's what exclusion does, we also need to be locating the problem in our own failure to recognise those needs and our failure to support the family, because yes, it does need to happen earlier. It's not just in schools where children need to be supported, but actually we need to be identifying those children early who are at risk and providing those families with support earlier through social services. And in addition to being a cause, poor mental health is also an outcome of social exclusion, with an increased risk of developing a major mental disorder at 3 years, increased risk of criminality, as we've heard. So in terms of cost efficiency, because that's, I mean, I'm sure that's important as well, for each year, every cohort of permanently excluded pupils, this will go on to cost the state an additional 2.1 billion. So that's 370,000 per child in terms of sort of healthcare, criminal justice costs than they otherwise would have done. So it's actually financially expedient to be supporting them, sort of intervening earlier and supporting them to stay in mainstream schools. And I think it does, you know, it does bear mentioning that our borough does have the title of one of the most unequal in the whole country. And it would therefore logically follow that it has among the highest rates of school exclusions, because all school exclusion is going to do is entrench already existing social divides. So we need to be committing to working closely with schools and with social services and child and adolescent mental health services to make sure that they have the resources to spot these children early for prompt assessment and early identification of those children and those families who are most at risk, and designing comprehensive packages of care for them. We need to be adequately resourcing schools to provide reasonable adjustments and pastoral care and try and undo some of the damage that 10 years of austerity has done in terms of removing special educational needs teachers and teaching assistants and the rest of it. And there needs to be a fair and accessible process for families to challenge exclusions where appropriate. And then after that child has been excluded, there needs to be further work, sort of specific vocational and psychological support for children so that we can kind of mitigate some of those long-term effects that we know about. And that needs to have a specific focus on the most affected group, so namely black and minority communities. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Pascal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. First of all, can I congratulate Councillor Lloyd North on his motion, his maiden speech. Thank you very much. I speak in support of the amendment to this motion, concentrating on the attainment gap part of this motion, as amended. The largest task is indeed in the BAME communities, but also in significant work needs to be done in addressing in other communities too. If I could add from experience as a governor in a borough-maintained school, we respect the overall borough statistics, but in our school we also have a wide range of neurodiversity, and this year a very large number of Afghan evacuees. Despite this, I would like to pay tribute to all staff and council officers and working with other agencies in focusing on supporting each individual pupil according to need, measuring progress and the need for further interventions to enable them to fulfill their life potential and be the best they can individually be. I believe this is the best way to reduce, not to solve totally, but to reduce the exclusions that have been mentioned. I support the amended motion. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pascal. I now call on Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. May I first congratulate Councillor North for his amazing maiden speech and, of course, getting both parties to agree, in fact, all parties to agree for this motion. Very well done indeed. Madam Deputy Mayor, I do support this motion, and this is a personal to me as a black man, as one of the three black men in this chamber, representing over 156, as it stands, over 150 residents in the Kensington and Chelsea borough. It's important, when I used to mention I'm the only black man standing here, now I'm blessed to say that both parties, of course the Labour is leading the way, have made sure that we've got another black man joining both parties. So we have three rather than one. And that is what I mean representation matters. Whether it's in education, whether it's in making decisions in the council, whether it's any form, faith, non-faith, representation matters. And if we do not educate the next group of generation or the next generation, that representation will not be equal. And I think it's important to know educating this generation, whatever color they are, whatever religion they are, is greater needs for our borough and the continuous diversity of this great borough of ours. Madam Deputy Mayor, I do support this motion because it's very personal again. My wife is a primary teacher, so I understand the care and the passion the teachers do give. However, when the teachers do get wrong and the school system gets wrong, it's us to point out and to make sure the system is corrected. Education is a pathway to prosperity. And we know why education pathway to prosperity. One gets a good education, manages to get a good job that pays well, and gets a roof over his head, or over her head, and the family that supports. So it's a good way to prosperity. If I will go back to an example that I've used earlier, you and me may have in common, and we love this great borough of ours, but you come from the New York, you speak English. I came from Somalia, I never spoke English at the time. I had to go to ESOL classes here in Kensington and Chelsea, and learn in Kensington and Chelsea, in Kensington, North Kensington, college at the time it was called in Warrington, in Camden Ward, and to try to speak the language and learn the language. And amazingly, I went to Hammersmith and Fulham College at the time, Hammersmith West London College, and then ended up University College London, which I consider the best in the world. So be it the figures say 10th in the world, or the 7th sometimes, but to me it's the #1 in the world. And I'm pleased to say that I have attended for both my first degree and my master's degree. And this would never have happened if I did not have a good education. Imagine if that college throw me out and say, we exclude you for who you are, and we cannot allow you simply because you did not have an opportunity for your parents to come and support you. The way you act, the way you dress, the way you behave is alien to us. I think it's important for us to understand the different cultures and diversity and appreciate rather than making school exclusions, Madam Deputy Mayor. One thing I wanted to mention as well is 60% of our residents is privately educated. Imagine if we have a 6% compared to the 6 to 7% of the whole country, the United Kingdom. What are we saying? What signal are we sending to this generation that we're not, schools are excluding them? The party minority, mainly the black children, and although it's a class, I do believe it's a class issue, but mainly black and ethnic minorities and mixed minorities are the ones who have been excluded from the schools. And it's because of the economy, it's because of the way they have been brought up. And I understand the amendment, and I wish and I hope the amendment can be taken back simply because we cannot blame the parents and their upbringings and the home that they come from rather than getting the education system right. So I do believe and I hope the amendment can be taken back and this Labour motion will move forward so that we can have an equal opportunity for every child in Kensington and Chelsea. So we like to go against this. I'd like to go against the amendment and vote for this motion, Madam Deputy Mayor. We like to support all our communities, the different colours, different faith groups, and also the majority of us to make sure that every child in Kensington and Chelsea gets the most opportunities that they can while they are in this borough, and then hopefully we contribute to the well-being of our borough as well as to the rest of the country and hopefully to the world. Once again, Madam Deputy Mayor, I would call for the amendment to be scrubbed and make sure that this motion goes through and hopefully come back if we can do better and then get there with the figures later on. Many thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. I just must correct you, though, because I speak American. So just to point out that I did come here with a foreign language.
I thought America speaks English. Is there another language? Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
I now invite Councillor Foulkes to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And it's great that we're having this debate.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You weren't on the list. I'm sorry. Please, Councillor Wade.
It was just some observations. If you remember when we were on the exclusion team and we went round a number of schools, what was interesting about it was the level in the schools at which they set the exclusion level. They were really quite high. The other thing that was interesting when we went to, I think it was Holland Park and KK, it was if a child was actually going through trauma, crisis within their lives, there was no space within the school for the child to be removed, to be able to be counselled. And I would say that's something that should be taken into consideration. But I think the worst experience, and perhaps Madam Mayor will remind me of the name of the place, was the school that we went to in the north of the borough where children go when they have been excluded. That is a place where I thought left me with profound depression. It was a place which gave no aspiration. When I asked about what are the courses you're going to give girls, nail technology. Well, these girls weren't stupid, and actually there's a better life, there are better opportunities, and I think that there was just a mismatch. Just because the girls are there does not mean to say they want to do hair or nail technology. There should be a wider scope. There's got to be better analysis. It's just an observation having been on that particular panel, but it was lack of space when there's a crisis, and you perhaps pick up why people are having problems. Thank you.
I think you're referring to the Latimer alternate.
I think that was Depression Row.
Yes, but wasn't it changed? Anyway, yes, it's been changed. But thank you for that. Councillor Folks?
Hello. Thank you very much again for bringing this motion. It's a really important topic. So just a few reflections, Councillor Ahmed. Thank you for the points you made. I think you will very much enjoy reading the school inclusion strategy that we've just developed that actually covers a lot of the suggestions that you made. We're already considering them and making them. The point that Councillor Ali made about education being important, absolutely, I agree. Education, education, education. I think that's what Tony Blair said, and I agree with him completely. And that's why we're so pleased to have 93% of our grant-maintained schools in this borough are good or outstanding. So this is the point we're making, that it isn't just about our schools not being good enough. It's so much more than that, that we need to wrap around about what has happened in our children's lives. As you say, the psychological trauma to do with the family, all those things are what we've got to use this trauma-informed strategy to help support them. Thank you to Councillor Janssen for actually eloquently expressing why it is impossible actually to agree to your emotion to have any exclusions in this borough, because I think we have to acknowledge that there will be occasions, particularly, and it actually even in the Southwark policy that Councillor Denko mentioned, that, you know, if a pupil is putting other pupils or a teacher at risk of physical harm, I think none of us can agree that you have to leave, you know, that you can't say they can't be excluded from that school. You have to consider the teachers and the other pupils there. Thank you also to Councillor Hudd, who pointed out that we live in a borough that has very, very different, unique and complex circumstances. So it's very difficult comparing what we have in this borough to other boroughs and around the world. And finally, on a note, I just want to congratulate all our teachers in all our schools who do an incredible job with an incredibly varied, diverse, wonderful and interesting group of children. We're so proud of everything that they do, and we're so lucky to have them working with us. And also just the fantastic officers that we have in our family and children's team who are supporting all of our children here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dent-Code, would you like to speak?
I would like to round up a few points. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And thank you for everybody's comments. We're talking about I brought up the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation report, Poverty and Prosperity, and Councillor Hudd brought up this comment that children from deprived backgrounds often have this, often fall into exclusion for 101 reasons, often parental stress and so on. We can fix that. We can actually fix that. In this borough, there are less reasons to have such depths of poverty than there are elsewhere. We still have money, unlike other areas. We are a wealthy borough, and we should be doing more to deal with that, seriously. I just want to say to Councillor Yankson, thank you for your comments, that having spoken to numerous parents over the years, these are, friends of mine whose children have been excluded or are at danger of being excluded, that the parents feel discriminated against too, and they're not going to go to, frankly, a white teacher and challenge them and say that your teacher is discriminating against my child because of the fear of authority and so on. And they found that very difficult to do it, and I'm talking about people that I know. And I do also agree with Councillor Thaxter that we don't need more reports. We know what's going on. Let's take some action, please. We do, Councillor Fox, we're in line with national averages. We must do so much better. We should be better than the national average. Oh my goodness, we really should. The best borough, that's what we're going for, has to do better than that. And it is the African Caribbean children who are most affected, and it comes up in every single report, as well as, special needs children, which I find quite shameful. We have to take away the shame and the blame that people feel when they are excluded and their families feel. As Councillor Ahmed has told us, that many children have a psychiatric diagnosis, and this is why they can't perform at school, and they're struggling at school, and actually excluding them makes that worse. And these children have been failed by us, and the families have been failed by us, and we need to actually support them. As she said, the exclusion entrenches the social divide that we have here, sadly. There are a lot of ways, and you said, I'm glad that you were looking at the Southwark the Southwark programme, Councillor Fawkes, because I think they're clearly doing very, very good work there. Yeah, we must give them all a fair chance. They only exclude children if they're putting other children's safety at risk. That is, you know, that's potentially a crime. Nobody would stand by that and say that children who are violent should be kept in school. But we are sending children to, we're sending children to alternative provision who are just struggling a bit. They're a bit gobby. They can be all kinds of things. They're all, they may be struggling because they're being challenged. They can't keep up with school, and they start having negative attitude at school. And I know children that has happened to, just because they lose their confidence and they get picked on. And that is absolutely true. Some teachers do that. And some of the things I've heard from Holland Park parents on this issue, and it is the elephant in the room, about exclusion of black children from that school is absolutely shameful, and we really must stop that if we go to United Learning. I don't know what's going to happen. For the record, Kensington Aldridge has an inclusion unit. They do exclude children if they're very difficult. They have an inclusion unit, and children are taken out from certain classes and they're looked after one-to-one in their inclusion unit. No more nail technology, absolutely not. Thank you, Councillor Wade. We need to give these children a fair chance, and these private alternative provisions are really not good for our children. I was quite shocked, as Councillor Wade was, not only with the premises that the children were in, but at the attitude to the people who run them. Absolutely shameful, and they did genuinely ask another council, a nearby council, to send them more children. They weren't making enough money. We don't want to do that. It's shameful, I really hope that that people will support the motion as is, and not have, and just draw a line under these money-making, profiteering exclusion schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dencode. I now put the amendment to the vote. Would those for the amendment please show? Would those against the amendment please show? Are there any abstentions? I declare the amendment carried. I now put the motion as amended to the vote. Would those for the motion as amended please show? Would those against the motion as amended please show? Are there any abstentions? I declare the motion as amended carried. I shall hand the meeting back to Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Motion 5, building safety. Motion 5 is the subject of building safety. I call upon Councillor Simmons to formally to move the motion standing in her name, and Councillor Ali to second.
I wish to move the motion.
I beg to second, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Simmons.
Mr. Mayor, Madam Deputy Mayor, fellow councillors,
Before I speak to the motion, I would like to first thank the residents of Nottingdale Ward for electing me to represent them. As many of you know, I'm a long-time resident of Nottingdale and a long-time community activist, but I would never have considered becoming a councillor prior to the devastating and wholly avoidable horror that I witnessed on the 14th of June 2017, and the actions and inactions of this council towards those affected over the last 5 years. What I have seen has appalled me. One Nottingdale resident has said of this council, "We could almost forgive you for what you did before Grenfell. We can never forgive what you have done to us since." It feels pertinent also to remind the leadership and the Mayor of the words of another resident in July 2019, when this council shamefully abolished the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee against the wishes of bereaved and survivors, against the wishes of residents, and against the wishes of our elected representatives. We will scrutinise you anyway. We will scrutinise you night and day. I look forward to continuing to scrutinise the Council in this new capacity on behalf of the residents of Nottingdale to ensure that the commitments you have made to us since 2017 are honoured and that you deliver the long overdue change we were promised. There is a lot of work to do. And now I'd like to speak to the motion. The Aberfan disaster, which killed 116 children and 28 adults in 1966, led quickly to a review of the risks and to the Mines and Quarries Act 1969, which required steps to be taken to ensure the absolute safety to the public. The Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, which killed 193 passengers and crew in 1987, led quickly to improvements being made, including to the design of such vessels. The Hillsborough disaster, in which 97 people lost their lives in 1989, quickly led to a number of safety improvements in football grounds. The first thing we want to see after an avoidable disaster of mass fatality is swift and effective action by those in power to prevent this happening to anybody else. Grenfell United and others have campaigned on this point for years and continued to warn Grenfell too is in the post. And yet, in the 5 years since Grenfell, we have seen this government delay and prevaricate over making buildings safe. We have seen this government, including Felicity Buchan, our own MP for Kensington, vote against implementing the Phase 1 recommendations of Grenfell inquiry. We have seen this government, with its Building Safety Bill, attempt to legislate to force the innocent victims of this scandal pay the astronomical sums required to fix it. And we have seen this government misleadingly and arbitrarily offer half measures and partial solutions which still leave thousands of its innocent victims in dangerous, defective and often missold buildings and hugely out of pocket without redress. This is tantamount to extortion. It's a protection racket. On what planet is that an appropriate response for any government or any honourable person to a national disaster and a national scandal that has cost 72 lives and put hundreds of thousands more at risk? I feel sure that everyone in this room will agree with me that this is not normal. This is shocking. This is immoral. And this is wholly unacceptable. It's surely unconscionable for the Grenfell Council to remain in complicit silence while lives continue to be at risk across the country, while another Grenfell could happen tomorrow, and while the industry that caused Grenfell is profiteering and extracting life-changing sums of money from its victims while posting bumper profits in the tens of billions. I believe that the Grenfell Council has a moral duty to speak out loudly and publicly to ensure that Grenfell never happens again, to speak out against the government's self-evidently unethical, immoral, and downright grotesque attempts to force even one of its victims to pay for the mess it has made. After 5 years, it's time for the leader to demonstrate leadership on this issue. It is time for the Grenfell Council to reject the dishonesty, corruption and contempt that led to Grenfell. If it will not take this simple action, it is difficult to see how this council can claim to have changed, or indeed how it can claim to have any remorse for what happened here. And so I invite every member of this council to support this motion as it is. Thank you.
Congratulations, Councillor Simmons, on your maiden speech. Councillor Ali, do you wish to speak at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for allowing Councillor Claire Simmons for her amazing speech to continue. On that reason, I won't be speaking onto this motion, but I do support the motion. Thank you.
Members will see that an amendment has been submitted. I now call upon Councillor Thalasites to propose the amendment and Councillor Kamali to second it.
I beg to move, Mr. Mayor.
And I beg to second, Mr. Mayor.
I now invite Councillor Thalasites to speak for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And may I start by congratulating Councillors North and Councillor Simmons as well on their maiden speeches tonight. I'm going to talk a bit about building safety and building control in the Council. These are central issues to this administration and have to be one of our number one focus, I think, as a Council. It's not a political issue, it's one that we do need to act on wherever we can. The first duty of the government and the Council is to keep residents safe and ensure that people live in safe homes. And on the 14th of June 2017, a failure to do this was exposed horrifically, where 72 people died, and it's our duty to ensure that this never happens again. As a council, we have acted. Our homes are safe. We have adopted all of the recommendations that Hackett put forward and prepared safety cases in advance of the Building Safety Act. This has certainly led to improvements in the safety of our housing. And we have also expanded our building control team during the time that I was lead member for planning, leading to us going further than government in several cases, in particular on some of the Building Safety Act and Hackett recommendations. However, we must accept that government needs to go further as well, and so it is wrong that there hasn't been as much action has been required. 5 years after the tragedy, people across the country are living in buildings with dangerous cladding, and there are this delay should not continue any longer. Therefore, I'm happy to propose an amendment that calls on the government to do everything in its power to fix this and to ensure that nobody lives in a dangerous or defective building. At the same time, we do welcome government's plans to force developments and companies to fix the cladding crisis and remove the completely unacceptable financial burden from leaseholders. This is the right way forward, as no leaseholder should have to pay a penny to live in a safe accommodation. But, Mr. Mayor, we acknowledge that actions speak louder than words, and we will continue to keep pressure up on the government to make sure that they deliver on their commitments, as we have in improving our building control team, ensuring that that team is well resourced despite all of the financial headwinds, demonstrating our commitment to it as a central priority for this council and for this administration.
Thank you, Councillor Thalasites. Councillor Kamali, do you wish to speak at this point?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'll start by congratulating Councillor Simmons on a really powerful maiden speech on such an important topic for this council, but also for the country. Mr. Mayor, this is an incredibly important motion, and I'm incredibly supportive of the sensible and positive amendment that we are putting forward. We can all agree that the solutions to this issue are incredibly complicated, and it could well be argued that the steps taken so far by the government have taken too long, and during such time, too many leaseholders and property owners have been caught up in what is fundamentally a national scandal. There are stories from right across this country about people, through no fault of their own, being caught up in bureaucracy and costly solutions or service charges. On a personal note, I'd like to share a story about a friend of mine, a friend from Camden Ward, in fact. This friend, as is so often the case with London property prices, was unable to find housing within their budget locally, and so continued to work incredibly hard to grow their deposit and purchase a small apartment in Hackney, splitting the cost of the deposit with their sister. believing that owning their home would give them both security, safety, and a base from where to plan their lives as they grow up living apart. It was mere months later when they came to realize that the home they purchased fell into one of the criteria, meaning it required all of its cladding to be removed, and until such time, a 24-hour-a-day waking watch would be required, all charged back through the service charge to the tenants. The value of their home fell to zero. The mental distress this caused my friend and his sister was incredibly high, and the impact clear to see. Years of staying late in the office, skipping trips, events, activities to make sure they could all save, to make sure they could save up, came to naught when the freeholder put the letter through the post demanding repairs. Repairs on a newly built building. They have since, fortunately, both moved out of the property, but they've been unable to sell their home. They've both, as I say, moved into separate housing, my friend into a home with his wife and his sister into a different rental property. They've continued to receive large service charge bills, the inability to refinance their mortgage, and also the double whammy for my friend in having to pay additional stamp duty on the home with his new wife. This, Mr. Mayor, is one small story from a former RBKC resident, but speaks of the pain and suffering so many have faced across this country. Steps are finally being taken to address this, and the former Minister for Levelling Up did bring about some sensible and necessary reforms, most recently by agreeing terms under which lenders will once again consider these properties as an asset to which they're willing to lend, freeing some of those who have put their lives on hold and deferred plans whilst they dealt with the fallout. Further to this, I encourage the government to ensure that the Building Safety Fund is a process as streamlined as possible to enable applications to be assessed and determined in a timely manner, meaning that leaseholders and buildings with approved remediation schemes will not have to contribute to the removal of cladding if approved by this fund. Whilst watching on at the incredibly frustrating pace at which national policy comes about, we in RBKC are determined that no resident finds themselves in such a situation again. Thank you.
I now wish to open the motion up to debate, and I call upon any councillors who now wish to speak. If you want to speak, can you please wave accordingly? Councillor Dencode.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to add a few comments, but more than anything to congratulate Councillor Simmons for her excellent, and we knew she'd be brilliant, her excellent speech, her excellent maiden speech. And I'm sure there'll be many, many years with equally well-balanced and informative speeches. So thank you for that. I really feel that the imperative here is for this council to take a lead on this and not just to ask nicely. I think we've done enough of that. I asked nicely for many years, or for 2.5 years, where in the heart of government, and was ignored for a long time. It's very frustrating. I think the power of the Grenfell Council speaking out, and by the way, maybe having a bit of pressure on our MP, who has voted against every possible fire safety improvement, along with the government, while she's been in Westminster. What an absolute tragic shame. And it is a national scandal, and I'm sorry to say that she's not stepping up and speaking out for people who really feel that pain of there being another Grenfell 2 in the post. I am regularly contacted by gladiators and all the other groups across the country. Bless them, they think I can help, but I can't. But it's good to at least have the information of what's going on. And some people are absolutely terrified. The fire in New Providence Wharf, which was about a year ago now, in East London, they really felt that it was going to be another Grenfell, and if they hadn't been awake at that time of day, they would have died. And a lot of them talked to me very passionately about their fear for what happened there, and walking down blackened staircases. And they had a waking watch, and they were nowhere to be seen. But let's not be too complacent and self-congratulatory. There are a lot of buildings in this in this borough that have appalling fire safety issues, and I really feel for the residents of Adair and Hazelwood Tower at the moment who are going through utter hell, surrounded by thick plastic sheeting. They've had, I think, 3 or 4 different fire doors added, and I know this isn't entirely the council's fault, but they are not being well cared for, and there is very little moral support for them there, and the poor residents there are really, really struggling. So let's just really step up and be the best borough, because there's an awful lot of work to be done on an awful lot of buildings in this borough. We may not have too much cladding, but we have flammable render and dodgy fire safety throughout many of our buildings. So let's before we get too complacent, let's sort those out first, and please put pressure on our MP to actually stand up for Kensington, as she should. Thank you.
I now invite Councillor Taylor-Smith as the lead member to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot to respond to. So first of all, yes, let me just start by congratulating Councillor Simmers. A very emotional speech for reasons that we all agree with as well. So I think one thing that's coming as a theme for everybody that's spoken today is that we as a council really do need to roast the government to get these changes made. These are important changes, and these are things that we need to do. I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the specific comments that have been made. I mean, Claire talks about swift, effective action. Absolutely right. We talk also about the impact that this has on our leaseholders from having to pay these costs. And that, again, we agree with it. I think it's absolutely shocking. I think that leaseholders, we should look at this scandal as a polluter, and a polluter should pay. So I think predominantly the first person who should be paying should be the manufacturers who are involved on this, but the government should be able to step in and do what they want. Do what they can. I think there's been many references to Felicity Buchan and the Conservatives voting against the fire safety bill when it was first brought forward. And this I find actually quite shocking, because where I get upset about this is that it was a political amendment. And may I ask, first of all, if there's anybody on the Labour group, that first of all tell me the name of the MP who put the amendment, and then secondly, what was actually in that amendment? What recommendations from the Hackett report were included in that amendment? Silence. Well, I'll give you an example, and the reason why it was voted against by the government, because it was pure political manoeuvring. It incorporated things that were just completely impractical. For instance, fire doors. One of the recommendations that came from Hackett was that a fire door should be inspected regularly, and that was deemed to be every 3 months. Now, if you think of us with our modest housing numbers of 9,500, that would be 38,000 visits a year. That's 100 visits a day that we would have to employ people to go and do fire door inspections. And you can imagine our residents, the first time you knock on their door, they'll be quite happy to let you in. But when you knock again in 3 months' time, saying, I've come to have a look at the closer, what do you think their reaction is going to be? So the vote against those amendments was purely that the government recognised that there should be consultation on some of the recommendations in order to get it right, rather than just giving some political change, to the legislation that really wouldn't be practical. And that's what's important. I think going back on some of the other things, I mean, Councillor Thalasitis has talked about action more than words. And I think that's where we have the power and we have the responsibility to do as much. And reference to that in terms of all the things that we are doing. We are now we remain the only council that is certificated with BAFE, SP 205 certification, which allows us to do certificates. Nobody else has done it. And that's because we've invested in safety and we're investing in our homes, because it's absolutely paramount that we never, ever see anything like what happened with Grenfell happen again. And we're determined to do that. So there's been a lot of investment that's going in. Councillor Dentco talks about all these fire unsafe buildings and flammable render, etc. Well, I'd like you to identify, where is this flammable render? I can tell you that we have 430 notices as far as fire is concerned. When we first took this on, we had many thousands. Now, a notice could be just not having a smoke detector working. And we're working our way through that. It's significantly reduced, and we will continue to do so. But sometimes you get notified and you can't do things immediately. But what we've demonstrated in the council, that when we have identified issues, such as the cladding at Rodare and Hazelwood, we put waking watches into the building, and we took immediate action to deal with that. And we dealt with that, as far as the residents are concerned, with their consultation. So, I mean, really just to summarise, and I'm sorry if I haven't made reference to everybody that spoke here today, is that we stand behind the spirit of this amendment, that we need to get these changes, but I do support the amendments that have been prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Councillor Thalasitis to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
I think Councillor Taylor-Smith has summed up well.
In which case, I now invite Councillor Simmons to respond to the debate for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the debate. I just want to say I prepared my speech before I saw the amendment, and I did so in the spirit of optimism as regards how much this council may have changed since the 14th of June 2017. Upon reading the amendment, I can see that my optimism was perhaps misplaced. I'm not seeing any argument at all for any of the deletions in the amendment. I'm not seeing any justification for it at all. Thank you, Councillor Taylor-Smith, for your contribution. I just want to say in response to that, it doesn't matter what reason you give. It doesn't matter what excuse you give for why we are in this situation 5 years after Grenfell. It doesn't matter the reason why. We still owe it to everyone in the country, actually, but to everyone in Kensington, certainly. We still owe it to them to make representations for change, for the change that I have written, among others. And I'm not seeing any rational argument for why the amendment has been made or why the deletions have been made. And I'd just like to say, I'd like to ask all members here to just consider very carefully what message would you like to send to residents concerning your position on Grenfell and the building safety scandal, on the Grenfell Tower fire, and on the deaths of 72 residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. I now put the amendment to the vote. Would those for the amendment please show? Would those against the amendment please show? Are there any abstentions? Given that the majority have voted in favour, I declare the amendment is carried. I now put the motion as amended to the vote. Would those for the motion as amended please show? Would those against the motion as amended please show? And given that everybody has voted in favour, I declare the motion as amended carried. It is now 12 minutes to 9. Having been in touch with the whips, I am not going to ask for the suspension of Standing Order 24/01 to allow the meeting to finish later. So we will not proceed to motion 6 this evening. But we will move straight on to item 7, appointments to committees and outside organisations. The appointment sheet has been circulated with the agenda. I call on Councillor Thalasitis to move the nomination standing in his name.
Beg to move, Mr. Mayor.
Are the nominations agreed?
Agreed.
I declare them carried. Are there any other appointments? Is that agreed? I declare that carried. That concludes the business of this evening's meeting of the Council. The next meeting is scheduled to be held on the 12th of October. Good evening and thank you. And do have a nice summer, and I hope it isn't too hot.
Well done.